I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Paul Cassie for me, the podcast about, I almost said the film about podcasts. Cool. Now that I don't want to see. The podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader. They explore how they speak to their moment in this one. The show is hosted by two guys, and one of the guys, my name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. How are you, Jake?
I am doing okay. I am feeling a little bit keyed up. I had a diner Diet Coke, and I feel like those are strong.
They're supercharged.
And I also laden. They're supercharged. They're laden, and I also had a vegetable omelet. So I assume that I'm just like I'm nutrished.
Okay, truly did not know what was going to come out of your mouth right there.
How are you? Right. How are you feeling? Have you had any omelets recently?
Nope. I did have a couple of eggs today. I had some enchiladas with eggs, and they were nice. Pretty nice.
These are fried eggs you put on there?
Yep.
Don't like a fried egg. The runniness is... Eggs are like on the border of gross to me, so they need to be scrambled. I get very, very like rigid 5-year-old about eggs.
All right.
I'm otherwise a fairly adventurous eater.
I say fried egg, I'm in love. That's what I said about that particular dish. I'm excited to talk about this film, but should we bring somebody in? Why waste any more time?
We got to bring in our guest, and we got to ask our guest about omelets and all kinds of other stuff. First, did want to just plug our Patreon.
Yep.
Patreon.com/podcasty4me. It is a way to make this free show that we provide for free slightly less of a financial burden on both of us.
That's correct.
We are getting the
putting the brakes on the descent down the hill. Yeah.
The ledger is getting pink now. It's like a medium rare, I would say.
Yeah.
And climbing. So check that out, patreon.com/podcasty for me. All the hits are there. That's not a thing anyone says. Our guest today is a critic and filmmaker, and I'm about to make an announcement. Podcasty for me's paranormal correspondent in both senses of that. Welcome back to the show, Comrade Yui. How you doing, Yui?
I mean, I didn't know I had a job now, but that's nice. That's interesting.
Unpaid position.
It's an
honorary.
I would say it's more like a you have a key to the house. You know what I mean? Like you can come by.
I'll make sure to rub my muddy shoes on the floor mat as long as that's okay with you.
What kind of shoes are you wearing right now, Yui? Can I ask you that? Are you wearing shoes?
I mean, yeah, I'm wearing shoes inside my house, because I'm a sociopath like Mishima. No, I'm not doing that. I'm wearing no shoes because it's the fucking summer, people. Come on, let's get with it.
Yeah, come on. Yui is right. What is going on over there, Jake?
I just got in and I'm wearing Tevas. And I also, there's some cat litter on the floor in this room because the cat throws it around. And so I just left the Tevas on.
Your cat is what we call an aesthetic terrorist.
Look, I'm sorry. Here, how about some ASMR?
Wow.
Oh, that was disgusting. Oh, I'm going to throw up.
Somehow I'm totally inclined to agree. Very disgusting, very nasty.
It's fine. It's gonna get cut out. It's fine.
No, actually, please live in it. It has it sounds like summer sweat beneath the straps somehow.
It's just Velcro.
Well, too bad.
So you got your nasty little toesies out. Ian as well. Got those filthy flappers.
Yep.
How are they smelling?
Come on.
I'm taking control of the show, by the way. I'm doing this right now. I'm taking control. So being a supporter of the
movie.
Patreon, I wanted to... because you guys are smart, intelligent leftists. You believe in distributive ownership over cinema.
So this is a struggle session.
So what I thought is, well, hey, as long as I'm pitching in, I'm kind of like a producer of this show, and you guys are the directors. And so really, at the end of the day, you guys aren't auteurs. Really, I'm in control.
Right.
So what I thought is I'd leave some notes, because you guys would obviously concur with whatever I had to say.
I love this.
I want to say some things that I've observed about the show. Number one,
please.
Steven Spielberg definitely directed Poltergeist. And if you disagree, You people,
Hell
anyone who
yeah,
disagrees
that
with this
rules.
is dumb.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Secondly, I want to say, you guys need to stop being so mean to each other. You know, it's kind of, I don't know. I feel
is that not the juice?
I don't know, but
no.
I feel like it's like the fake juice. I feel there needs to be more honesty, more openness, more transparency above all else. And what was my third thing? I didn't have a third thing. Sorry.
All right.
But those are my notes. I'm cracking the whip.
Well, thank you, Yui.
Totally agree on both accounts. Gonna shout out our friends over at To the White Sea, whom we've previously referenced as sort of a lighthouse on the rocky shore of friendship and podcasting. Seems like they're always supporting each other.
Why did you phrase that like it was Virginia Woolf?
To the White Sea, more like to the lighthouse.
Yeah, we did it.
Yeah,
we did it. I'm so happy for us. It's already a disaster. Fuck.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me just look up some dresses with pockets really quick.
Okay.
That's what I assume it was a dress, right? The Virginia Woolf was wearing when she put the rocks in her pocket.
Oh, I guess so. I mean,
it's relevant to today's
shit.
True.
Yeah, we're all.
This can't really be mad at
face.
suicide talk today. This is the big
for once
suicide
the one time.
episode. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the notes, Yui, and it's time now for a segment. We have to get into something that happened. This is, of course, Paul the News Fit to Clint. This is a relatively new segment where we talk about shut the fuck up. That we talk about stuff that's going on up to the minute with Paul Schrader and Clint Eastwood, the two guys we have talked about on the show. There's two of us. There's two of them. It adds up. Yui occupying a thrilling sort of fifth node.
Oh, I thought you were going to say fifth column. Please don't. Please don't.
No. You're a node. Perhaps, you're a node. Yeah. So first of all, let's get the Clint thing out of the way. I checked out my Clint Eastwood Google alert that I have set up. Not a lot of news going on with Clint of late. I assume he's hard at work getting juror number 2 ready to win Best Picture.
Yep.
But in the meantime, John Lloyd Young, who plays Frankie Valli in Jersey Boys, the great film Jersey Boys, he is returning to the Cafe Carlyle on May 14th.
Hey.
For reservations, you can go to a website and check it out. Oh, it's got $3 signs. I don't know if anybody in our audience is
that kind of flush. Yeah.
But anyway, check out the Patreon if you are. And that is the Clint part. And then in terms of Paul Schrader, there has been a lot of Paul Schrader news. First of all, there was the big Variety profile that came out. This is all sort of like, I guess, run up to O Canada playing at Cannes, although it does not yet have a distributor. So it's sort of like
well, that's going to be you, right? Like you guys
coverage.
Are distributing O Canada?
Yes, we plan to purchase it in quantities that legally suggest intent to distribute. So there was the article where he said that he elucidated how Martin Scorsese's dog bit off and swallowed some of his finger. Any thoughts?
Gotta say.
He's
a man who's, look, we're going to talk all about how much or how little he has in common with Mishima, but
yeah, he's going to come up on the episode.
A flair for the dramatic is certainly in his personality.
Look, let's not mince words. It's bullshit. This did not happen. This is fake. This is bullshit. The dog bit him on the thumb at the most. The dog did not bite off his fucking skin. Like, I'm sorry,
took out one of those little tiny tooth-sized divots, and that's it.
Oh no! You know what? My cats do that to me all the time. Agreed, fuck off, Paul Schrader. I don't
my
give a shit.
cats have also consumed my blood. Yeah.
And Scorsese, like, you're telling me Scorsese has these rabid dogs? Give me a break.
Well, he did also reveal that Scorsese has like a live-in nurse or like an on-staff nurse.
Yeah.
So he didn't have to go to the hospital.
Well, he made it sound like this nurse intervened at a critical moment where he would have lost the thumb otherwise.
To fucking save him.
Yeah.
Right. Like swooped in like an angel.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the Blink-182 album cover. That's what I envision when I envision the nurse. I don't know if that's right, but that's what I'm thinking.
You're being honest with your own mind. That's great.
Thank you so much. First time. Next, Schrader got in a little bit of hot water for a very, in my opinion, strange reason. Recently, Roger Corman died at the age of 98. Rest in power, having achieved basically as much as a human being could probably ever hope to, and being so beloved that like extraordinarily famous people who never issued press releases saying how much he meant to them and how important he was and how he was like the only nice person in Hollywood.
Yeah. I consider it a kind of a countdown. You pick up the story of any filmmaker, American filmmaker from 1960 to 2000. It's just, when will they say that Corman was a big influence on them and was a, like a real teacher?
And so Corman died, and Ian and I had a bit of a conversation about this off pod, in which I revealed myself to be maybe like callous and
you exposed your true inner dark self.
Yeah, revealed, not the word I would use, but
I didn't think through. So, well, in this conversation with Ian, I was suggesting that I have a hard time with people expressing deep sadness when someone dies at like 98 years old that they didn't know. Now, if you are one of Roger Corman's family or friends, I'm very sorry for your loss, and my heart goes out to you, and I hope that all the appreciations of his life and work that are coming in are a balm to you, and the guy seems like he was very cool. If you didn't know Roger Corman, I'm confused that you would be gutted by this loss.
It's the thing we got to celebrate his life. Like he made it. He won.
No, it's a great time to talk about how great the guy was.
Yeah, it's not like Bowie, where it's like, oh man, taken away too soon. He did it. He did the thing. Right. So like, what's to mourn? He fucking rocked out.
It's not like Paul Walker or Brian the dog. He seems to have been mentally spry enough to be introducing films like 2 weeks ago or something. Like the guy kind of
the best you can hope for yourself.
Yeah, he was going until he's like died in his sleep next to his wife of 54 years, I think. Like it's hard to get that much better than that. He died before we're all gonna like boil alive. I always think that whenever anyone dies, I think
got out before it got really nasty.
Well, getting's good.
Well, I'm hoping
just
we
like
can.
Mishima.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
Truly.
Although we'll get to that. I do have, unfortunately, folks, I have a pretty strong argument for not killing yourself that I will issue during this episode, and I'm
talking about the important things here on Podcast for
Yeah.
Hey, exactly. But Schrader, 3 days ago, day after, maybe day of Corman's death, posts on where else? Facebook.com. As always, he opens his post with an all caps phrase, sort of like a typeset chapter of a book. He says, "Roger Corman. Let's not too sentimental about Corman." Mistake his.
Mm-hmm.
Even in my exploitational extremes, I couldn't interest Corman in my scripts. Rolling Thunder began at AIP but moved on to 20th. Roger wouldn't touch Blue Collar even with Pryor. As soon as they could, Coppola, Scorsese, and Demme all moved away from AIP. Roger was better at hyping his rep than at making good films or supporting good filmmakers. It's got 1.2K likes, 475 comments, 177 shares here on Facebook and on Twitter. It was obviously going off. And I said this online, but this is, like crass and uncouth and also like extraordinarily unsurprising, and also of no
self-interested in a way that also is extremely predictable,
but of no threat to Roger Corman's legacy. Like it's not like he accused him of a crime or anything.
Well, here's what we're looking at. I'll tell you right now. Here's what it is. What we're looking at is Schrader the critic, and not Schrader like the artist, really.
I would say we're looking at Schrader the critic and Schrader the bitter man.
Agreed.
Well, but you think about this, right? Like, think about how many people of his generation, like Peter Bogdanovich, started out as critics, started out as like lowly peons in the kind of like the sub-professional film world, and then graduated upwards thanks to Corman. And so, he's looking at it, he's like, well, why wasn't that, one of me? Why didn't it happen quicker? Right. That type of shit. To me, it's like the sour grapes of critical discourse, where you have all these, you have people like Pauline Kael who tried to step into the ring and then failed and fucked up and then basically had to go back to writing critique. And so Schrader's very much, he succeeded, but he's still kind of bearing these wounds. And, do I blame him? No. If that happened to me, I'd be a little bit mad, I guess. If this stuff got rejected, that does hurt. At the same time, though, man, like it really goes to show you that like that whole maxim of like, oh man, you really mellow out as you get older. That's not true. I feel like Schrader has like developed. He's developed a larger degree of bile, I think, than he did as a youth. I mean, maybe less volatile, but still simmering.
More than anything, it's the lack of growth. I agree. That's frustrating to witness.
I wonder also, though, how much of it is calculated to get people to talk about him. Like,
oh, of course it is, right? It's a way to turn things being like, well, here I am, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right.
By the way, I have a movie coming out, and people are talking about Paul Schrader. That Criterion just announced that a big films of Paul Schrader collection coming to the Criterion channel. Obviously, that was probably planned, sort of to time with this podcast, but he's in the discourse, and this, for some reason, this has been too much. And there's been a lot of discourse, and granted, this is probably like a total of 60 people all talking to each other. This is why I'm
happy that I don't get involved in this. Yeah. Jake had to text me about this. Let me tell you something.
No one's talking about this in Oaxaca.
No, didn't in fact encounter a single person who brought this up.
Sure.
So,
what are people talking about in Oaxaca movie-wise? Like, what was the last time you talked to a person about a movie? Just out of curiosity.
Talking about Challengers, man. What are you talking about?
Yui is correct. Yes, I went to see Challengers, and everybody who came out of it was either confused or ecstatic, which are 2 A+ responses to a film.
Tennis.
Yes.
Tennis. Wait. Tres boletos? For Challengers? What is tickets?
Yeah.
Tres boletos. Yeah, because of the meme. Yeah, so then people were dragging up some of Paul's posts, and probably these are all 19-year-olds and don't deserve much more, like any of the amount of time we've spent talking about them. But I felt that we should just say on the record that
I think it's okay
we fully support everything the man's ever said.
Yep, I was about to say the exact opposite thing. I think it's fine to just say that he's a crank. He can profess nasty Zionist opinions. He can talk about whatever he wants. To me, he is not in the zone of people that I feel by engaging with their films, I might be contributing materially to some type of evil in the world.
Especially not on the websites where you're watching a lot of
That's also correct. Yeah, don't know what you mean.
This is interesting, though, in comparison to Eastwood, because with when you were doing your Eastwood section of your podcast, a lot of the time you guys were reacting to stuff that had previously happened. Yes. Right? Like the legacy that he has left behind now. Because now he's kind of like more of a reclusive private figure. Which is he's always been, but back in the day, you'd hang out with Ronald Reagan, that type of shit. Whereas Paul Schrader very much is like still actively a crank and still actively on the he's roaming the wastes of the internet. Yeah. And so that kind of gives a different like this current season, you get a different edge to it where it's much more on like dealing with the here and now. And so like when you guys talk about this stuff, it does go a long way to show that the transplant of someone who like had attitudes that developed in the 1960s, talking about, people who just died, all these years later.
Yeah. I mean, what I find so fascinating about Schrader and what I think is worthy of discussing with a critical eye that sometimes finds the work valuable. But what I think is worth discussing about the man is how he seems to be able to so ably depict and critique a kind of like violent male solipsism that he also still possesses. Like he's able to look at and name the thing in a very precise way while still like not getting rid of it as a fault in his own personality.
Well, because it's what drives him. It's his energy. It's his engine. It keeps him going, I feel. If he gets rid of that, he's like, there's no power to his work. There's no contradiction.
Well, I'm going to suggest something as a little segue. We have another figure for whom that was maybe also his engine, and he did discover something else and
I
took him a different
actually
direction.
This is the star wipe. Consider this an audio star wipe.
All right.
This is from Schrader on Schrader. This is Paul talking about Mishima, but also perhaps talking about a certain Facebook user. I do believe that The Life is his final work, and I believe that Mishima saw it that way too. He saw all his output as a whole, from the tacky semi-nude photographs to the Chinese poetry to the Dostoevskian novels to his private army. It was all Mishima, and the public, particularly the Japanese public, wanted to slice it up into bits that they could appreciate, and he refused to let them. He said, "If you accept me, you have to accept the high and the low. It's all part of my output." And so I think we cannot pick and choose which parts of the man we want to consider the work of Paul Schrader. He is both the guy who made this movie and the guy who made those posts. And in the contradiction between that, therein lies the juice, I think. The Schrader juice. Celery juice, I would imagine, because of From Hardcore.
Yeah.
There's a celery
sexual obsession.
Wait, well, that's the end of the show. You're jumping the gun a little bit. Or maybe you're jumping the sword.
Great.
From the movie. Ian, you've been practicing an accent, you were telling me.
Yeah.
That you'd like to switch into
a very
now.
honorable accent.
Oh God. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
The accent of Scott Stokes, of old Henry Scott Stokes, whatever this Mishima's weird British friend's name was.
Yeah, his weird British friend. Hello, it's me. I'm here in the Japanese archipelago.
He's like Pierre O'Toole.
I would like now to switch over to our segment, the two questions. Is that okay with the two of you?
Affirmed.
3 people, 2 questions, 1 podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This is, of course, our signature segment where we ask each other 2 questions and get to know each other and I don't know, we know each other. We're just doing it for fun.
Keep getting to know, you know?
You're right.
Well, that's funny because that's exactly what I'm going to ask about, actually.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Can I just go into it?
Please.
Yeah, Yui, please go ahead.
So, yeah, just a real whatever, quick question. So you guys have been doing this.
Yeah, I would like to see Ian's penis. I think that would probably enrich the relationship.
Well, okay, that was the one I discarded, but I'm glad you answered anyway.
A lot of people have discarded it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. So you guys have been doing this for a fair number of years. Congrats on having no life.
Well, you mean like knowing each other or the podcast?
The podcast.
We've been doing it for almost, a year and a half.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to quibble with me about this,
I'm sorry.
Jesus, God, minutia, whatever. Anyway, the real quandary here that I want to ask about is you two guys, like, how is doing this podcast, like, when you began this as opposed to where you're at now, how has your relationship changed, you feel? Like, what do you feel about each other that you didn't feel at the beginning? Like, has this been something that's, like, deepened your friendship? Like, have you guys kind of have you articulated your differences from each other more fiercely? Like behind the scenes, I want to know, like, because you guys, to do this takes some discipline, some consistency, some, work, obviously. And I just feel, when I first was on the Iwo Jima episode, I listened to like a couple of your episodes because I was like, okay, let's see what this is all about, whatever. And then I dived into the back catalog. And at least personally, what I noticed was that at the beginning, it very much seemed like there was an imbalanced power dynamic. And now it seems like that's mostly gone. And you two are much more relaxed and just... like, even when you're sick, right? Even when you two are, flailing against your illness, there's a kind of easygoingness that has been acquired over the however many episodes you've done. So that's what I thought. And I wanted to ask you guys, like, what have you noticed about yourselves, each other, that kind of thing?
One of the things that I've noticed is that I would like Ian to answer this question first.
Oh, wow. That's so nice. That's an interesting question. A lot of sub-questions. Typical you. I love it.
Typical,
demanding
rich.
I got
detail,
footnotes
exactly.
too.
Yeah. So I totally recognize what you're describing. I also think that historically, if I'm going to reveal a little bit about myself, both in the artistic world and interpersonally, I'm attracted to people with complex and beautiful...
body hair.
Nope. Large personalities, clear ideas, people who have a real presence. And that's how I see my friend, Jake. And I think my tendency, because I just like to leave space to observe and engage with that person, is sometimes to fall into the background. I think something that I have learned in other aspects of my personal life, my romantic life, for example, is that can be a disservice to both people if you're not sharing of yourself. And it also offering. So I think I've tried to grow in that way. But what I've learned about my friend Jake, well, a lot of stuff I already knew and just got confirmed in terms of, I don't mean that as an insult. I'm being sincere. Just how disciplined you said, Yui, and that's correct. And how giving he can be while also making sure sort of like, even if I leave some type of gap in the production of the show, Jake will be there without question, which I think is very kind of him. And yeah, I think we've arrived maybe at a better balance of enjoying and also respecting and trying to allow for input on both sides. And I don't know. What do you think, Jake?
Well, thank you for what I assume was nice stuff. I was mostly shopping online during that. No. That's very generous of you to say. I think that I have learned in doing the show how to trust. End of sentence. I think a little bit. No, I mean I've learned how to, like, with Ian, and I think that it's hard for me to imagine doing this kind of project with anybody else because of the combination of thrill at surprising and enraging my friend Ian that I get. There's an engine that's sort of my engine, and also the deep respect and also like just fiery jealousy, intellectual jealousy that I feel toward my friend Ian, that where I can sort of in part trust that I can fall back on this guy to say something interesting. And also he's very careful to, or very, very kind to remind me that, like, who gives a shit if the episode is up at like 10 a.m. on a Friday instead of 12:01 a.m.
Now we're gonna get
like
300 emails saying, "Oh, yeah. it's
I hate
Ian's
it when
fault."
it's like that. No. It's not Ian's fault that happens. What I'm saying is that, like, I have texted you at like 11 at night on a Thursday saying I have so much more editing to do, and you'll be like, "It's fine. Like, don't worry." And then also you've just given yourself that advice probably once.
Yeah.
One time. And whichever episode you think that was, it's a different one.
Exactly. I think it's the closeness of death in my life that allows me to not care about that stuff.
Yeah, that's nice. That must be good for you, probably. No? Good? Bad?
Yeah.
Mix of both? Yeah, as you said, I've mostly confirmed things. And also I'm, getting concerned about some of the obvious decline that I'm seeing in your mental state. Well, it used to be your mental state that was declining, and now it's more your mental, like, acuity.
Yes, that's what
declining.
I would use as well. Yeah.
But you do seem, like, mood-wise a lot more stable, which is nice. That's a nice change.
I mean,
at least
that's a classic
outwardly.
Flowers for Algernon, just finding peace and...
Yeah. And the Charlie adaptation of that story starred who else but Cliff Robertson from Obsession, and it's all connected
there it is.
to Paul Schrader. And that was it. Yui, what have you noticed about our relationship since we started doing the podcast? You already answered.
Well, I just want to say
thank you for the question. Yeah,
thank you as well for, like, providing ample biographical and emotional material for my upcoming /fic about you too.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I hope that it is troubling.
Yeah,
it's sort of like our
Golden Pavilion. That's all I'll say.
Some kind of monster. This episode.
Yeah,
remember that when Metallica made that documentary about how they went to group therapy?
I don't watch, like, cringe stuff or whatever. I really try to avoid it. That documentary is unwatchable to me.
You're not looking at the video chat.
No. I just got a blindfold on right now. Yeah, that doc is just... I did see it all, but holy shit, never again.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
So it's just you're watching like these guys talking about how, like, oh, I'm going to therapy now. I'm really trying to sort out my life, and I'm like, this is fucking Metallica. What are you doing?
Yeah,
it drives me insane. It's like fucking. Again, it's like any metal band who's, like, talking about, like, man, I'm really getting in touch with my feelings while writing Saint Anger. Mm-hmm. Just enough. Like, I just don't want to see it. It's too much for me. It's crazy. It's like watching, like, some fucking hippie guy like talk about, man, I really settled down and I invested in some stocks on Wall Street and really got my life together. Oh,
investing
really? That's so great that you did, and then you sold out and everything. But like, I don't want to hear the emotional validation of you selling out. It's just terrible to me. Ugh.
So probably not going to have you back on for some kind of monster episode when we cover the films of, and say it with me, you both know who directed Some Kind of Monster, and I'm not filling for time here.
Nope.
The films of Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, of course. Sinofsky did the Paradise Lost documentaries about the West Memphis 3. So, whatever. Thank you for the question, Yui. I have a question here. This was submitted by a listener to the show via email. It says, given that you two have an uneasy relationship to auteurism, and I think that maybe is a typo.
Go on, please.
Sorry. How do you figure that cinematic artistry or artistry in general would be best handled in a post-capitalist society? Does art itself become a matter inseparable from basic life, or does it remain a specifically demarcated public good? Can art as we know it exist outside of cult/religious value or exhibition/commodity value? Many left-wingers I know and some Marxist authors seem to have an instrumentalist idea of art, that art must be subservient to political aims, not the other way around. Does this imply that art under socialism or communism will be primarily used to maintain the extant ideological framework? Would reactionary art, like Eastwood's or Schrader's, be allowed to exist? It seems to me that art itself tends toward an inherent perspectival pluralism, while the political sphere tends toward an inherent moral absolutism. Is a reconciliation possible? If so, what do you think that would look like? And this was emailed in by Yui a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, in case you couldn't pick up by the incredible elegance of the writing. Yes.
And also the many questions contained within the question. Yep. Yeah. I have an answer to this, which is probably considerably less well-read, and I can't cite my sources the way that I assume my interlocutors will be able to. But I think any liberative post-capitalist society will primarily allow for less toil and misery, and thus more just doing whatever pleases the people and creatures of the earth. We will be free to express our inherent humanity, however that what's the word I'm thinking of? However that expresses itself. Great sentence. Not like getting married to a 12-year-old, like a lot of
people who say that type of sentence.
Yeah, but I just mean like go for a hike or make a movie or whatever. And so I think in that world that I hope to someday either be a part of or help push toward, there will be room for all kinds of art, and the art that is reactionary will, I hope, be treated somewhat like the way we treat it here on the show, where we say, that's interesting. Some parts of it are worthy of appreciation. Some parts not so great. But I don't really, me personally, I don't think we can ever have like a real better world that tells people that they have to exclusively make movies that maintain the extant ideological framework. That sounds like a bummer to me.
Beautifully put.
Thank you.
I don't have perhaps nearly as much to add as you might think. I will unfortunately probably have to decline to engage in speculation about whether this will be a centrally planned economy or guided by some type of socialist market logic, which is probably way, way beyond the scope of a 2 to 5 minute question.
No, let's get into it. Come on.
Okay. I do think that as Jake is saying, the old boy Carl himself pointed out that's part of the thinking of this is that we are reclaiming the time to go to the theater, to think, to love, to whatever, sing, paint. I forget what else he says. And
he said goon. Did you say goon?
Might have. But I think certainly there's that element. And to answer the question about whether it need be like social realist, Germinal type art, I certainly hope not. That's not my belief, and I actually would like to think that the ideological framework that prioritizes the well-being of humanity in common will be strong enough that you can have space for independent individual expression of Mishima style right-wing aesthetics as politics through art. And I think his novels and most of his output are very, very beautiful, and I hope there's space for that. What the funding process will look like for large works of art, I think, is a question for people to consider. That is certainly something to say that, something like a film involves employing, depending on the type of film we're talking about, dozens or hundreds of people. And
well, it used to, but no longer, thanks to our sponsor for this week's episode, Sora AI. Now with this thing, you can make the most dog shit looking video.
Something that would make your grandma sick to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, and I think certainly there's questions about if something demands funding like that, then it does demand a certain public investment in the creation of that. And personally, I would say that that's part of why I would like to think of whatever economic version of socialism or communism we're thinking of. There's going to be hopefully many bodies that can have or approve of different types of art, different outlooks, support rising artists and also established people, and hopefully create a better system, like Jake's saying, where everybody's just having an easier time generally, so they don't experience that stress, and then just creates time and space and funding and plurality of thought to support all types of art. And yeah, I don't know exactly what that will look like, but
I think if, for example, like with CGI looks shittier, or like movie sets are maybe smaller, but the trade-off is
you don't have like IATSE members driving off the road and dying and leaving behind.
Yeah, and also like I don't have to like pay for health insurance every month or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm fine with fewer Marvel movies.
Yeah,
and it's not like those are like look that good anyway.
Right. No, I agree. And I'm hopeful that people, like you're saying, will maybe be focused enough on better things than they have been for the last, I'm going to say, about 150 years by necessity, as a consequence of trying to survive in industrial or post-industrial capitalism, that it will make them open-minded to all types of filmmaking that we haven't even yet seen, that don't require the type of extreme funding and basically growing up in some type of whatever nepotism that allows you to become a filmmaker, go to Tisch or whatever it might be these days.
Beautifully put. Yui, did you have an answer when you posed this question, or did you exclusively want us to answer it, which is, I think, a very defensible position?
Well, I take all my opinions from what you guys have on here, so ultimately what you said is fine by me.
We do not encourage this.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, wink. Don't encourage. Wink, wink, wink. Mm-hmm. Yeah. With this, I definitely share your guys' idealism in regards to, the hopes and dreams of, you would want it to be. You would want it to be something more open and pluralistic. And what I worry about ultimately is that in the process of getting there, that perhaps like some art will indeed be censored or even just like straight up destroyed to some degree. In as much as like any great social upheaval, it requires some degree of destruction of the old order.
And look, we're going to have to destroy all the S. Craig Zoller movies, and that's, maybe disappointing for some. What a fucking tragedy.
But... Oh, no. What'll he do? What'll he do without making fucking his shitty cop movies? Oh, no.
Probably continue combing his hair back.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Slimy. You look slimy.
You know what? The only thing with him I've ever been excited about is when Ridley Scott talked about adapting like a Western that he did, like a novel. That I'm excited about because I love Ridley and I love.
So you're excited for a Ridley Scott movie? That's totally fine to be. You're maybe thinking more practically and.
Well, I'm just wondering, when it comes down to it, like, I think we have to make the leftist case for art. Like, I think we really do, and I think. The attitude that I see that I worry about is this kind of like chest-beating chauvinism of like if you value aesthetics, you're a reactionary inherently. And
yes.
I actually really do worry about this because I think it encourages this culture of like Philistinism where you don't have to be like, you know, and you see the attitude also applied to like the sciences where, you know, okay, well that's bourgeois science or like this or that. Like that type of thinking I worry about a lot because I think it's easy to fall into when you say, well, I don't like this art, so we have to destroy it. Like it becomes just like there's no rumination on it. It just like automatically flows into an extension of, you know, what are admittedly, you know, noble goals, I think. And I'm just wondering, like if I think there needs to be people like you two doing work like this to say, here, you know, you can have an aesthetic sensibility and a concern and an analysis while not also, you know, having shitty politics. You know, you don't have to be a guy like Mishima who's like, oh, I love evil and fascism. And like, you know, in order to appreciate the beauty of Oscar Wilde, you don't even have to be that person.
I appreciate you saying that about us. We are probably going to have to put you on some kind of involuntary hold for...
No, not again.
No cops.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I think that's what the kind of thing we're aiming toward here. It's at least for me with the show, and this does segue, I think, nicely.
Very nicely.
It's my turn for the little segue. I'm imagining like a tech deck version of a segue.
Sure.
Are you?
Yeah.
Now, probably.
What is the tech deck?
Yeah.
Tech deck that's those little the finger skateboard. You probably had a kid in your class who would do the finger. You know what I'm talking about with the two.
Don't know about this.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Little.
Oh, Yui. I forgot that you went to school in outer space. And
I mean,
it's actually makes a lot more sense to me.
We only got skateboards in 0G.
Yeah, makes sense.
Although I gotta say, I did participate in a lot of gladiatorial matches.
That sounds cool. I would like to hear about that maybe on the Patreon, because we are 47 minutes into the
Ender's Game.
You know, I noticed both with Schrader, we talked about this in his his article Cannon Fodder on our Old Boyfriends episode, both with Schrader and with Mishima. I have noticed that guys, and it's mostly guys, who get really hung up on like capital B beauty tend to also be pretty intense and like seem hard to hang out with. This is something I've noticed, a pattern, at least between these two guys.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like that we're jumping right into it, but it is, at least in Mishima's case, explicitly a denial of the value of humanism. The idea that some automatic inherent worth in people makes protecting them the highest or one of the highest goals, and in fact says that, you know, all people should be subordinated to greater ideals, to sort of, you know, the pursuit of, like you're saying, capital B beauty. And does that mean that probably they're instrumentalizing people around them and maybe not looking at them as whole humans? Quite possibly. Although I think something that's fascinating about Mishima is his novels do allow for a very sort of like what I would say in other contexts is a humanist style understanding of all people as being driven by both unique and common desires. And then his attitude seems to be, I know that all people are people, but I just don't care. That's just less important to me than achieving something like the divinity of the emperor. So,
folks, if you haven't noticed, Yukio Mishima was 5'1", and I think probably my biggest issue with this film is that Ken Ogata is like 5'8". He's like a sort of unremarkable heighted man, and because I think so much of the pathology of this guy is I recognize it myself as a 5'8.5" foot man who basically has like height dysmorphia and kind of believes that I'm 5'1" for some reason.
Well, that end grew up being like chronically ill until he was 19. So
that'll do it to you as well. But sometimes you're a short guy who was sick his whole life, and you turn into Martin Scorsese, who seems pretty pleasant and even has a live-in nurse. Well, and sometimes you turn into a Yukio Mishima, who is the subject of today's film, Mishima: A Life in 4 Chapters, directed by Paul Schrader, written by Paul Schrader, Leonard Schrader, his brother, and Chieko Schrader, his brother's wife, and a person whose brother met in Japan. She's a Japanese screenwriter herself. Written by the three of them, Came out October 4th, 1985. It's been 3 years since Cat People, bit of an involved process getting this film made. Ian, had you seen this movie before? Yui, had you seen this movie before?
I had seen almost all of this movie before. I encountered this film in the great era of Vimeo video essays about film. I'm talking about 2016.
So you're seeing a lot of this. You were seeing a lot of probably Raging Bull also. I feel like that's a big
all sorts of stuff.
Video essay. A lot of maybe like the flavor of green tea over rice.
Yeah.
A lot of like Ozu.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And maybe Zack Snyder. There's sometimes people will like put so much work into one of those video essays that's about, Sucker Punch or whatever. You're like, what?
Yes.
Are we like subtweeting here? Is that what we're doing?
I don't know who that is actually, but
oh shit, okay.
Maybe.
Well,
I will bleep it.
There we go.
It's fun to bleep it. I like the bleep noise. It makes me laugh.
Me too.
But so you'd not sat down to watch the film?
No, but then I recall sitting down. I don't believe whatever happened in that span. We know that this is all beyond the scope of my ability to recall in anything in the world, basically. But I believe I'd seen the first 3 chapters before.
Oh,
and
interesting.
I had not read any Mishima at that time. So this time I had a very different experience because I had read 3 novels and lots of biographical material and some essays in preparation for this record. And this
also, you have that curious looking samurai sword hooked on your wall.
I do, yeah. My
which one of them
uniform.
Do you think is the curious looking one? Because there's a lot.
I mean, it's the one with all the hooks on. I'm not quite sure what those are for.
Sure, yeah.
Making it hurt. I had not seen this movie, but I had encountered Mishima. I was vaguely aware of it and him, and it seemed like one of those things that you kind of put off. To me, I had in my mind it was like whatever the color of pomegranates and some other like this sounds like it's probably very good but difficult. I'm basically never going to be in the mood to watch this.
This artsy fartsy Philip Glass bullshit. Who's got time for it?
Exactly. And then I mostly knew the story of Yukio Mishima from this essay by a guy named Brian Phillips called Sea of Crises that I read. Yep. I think it was first published in like Esquire maybe. That is mostly about Hakuho, the like wunderkind sumo wrestler who is he was a Mongolian born but became like Yokozuna, 4th non-Japanese ever to become sumo Yokozuna, and was considered like even more Japanese than the Japanese wrestlers. He had so thoroughly like absorbed the ghost of Japan or whatever.
Like Leonard Schrader.
Yep,
yes,
basically.
That's exactly right, yeah.
And it is fucked up that I kind of think it's less weird for a Mongolian guy to be transracial than a white guy. And that's
You're
on
right
me.
About that. Yeah.
I mean, less far to travel as a crow flies.
Sure.
Just saying.
He wasn't flying on a crow. He was riding that goddamn sandworm.
I was going to say he was probably riding one of those short horses, those funny short horses they have over there in Mongolia. But that essay sort of covers both Hakuho and Mishima as these kind of men who embody Japaneseness or one who trying very hard to and one who doing it sort of without meaning to, just by his very nature. And so I had not seen the film before, but I was excited to, and excited to revisit this very strange man. Is that okay to say? Mishima was kind of a weird guy.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit.
That one's safe to say. Yeah.
Perfectly fair.
Yeah. Yui, had you seen this before? Yeah.
Yeah, you basically like mailed us rats, like Jared Leto the Joker, in order to ensure that we would let you do this episode.
I was thinking sort of reserved a plot to the cemetery, like 30 years in advance. Just locked it down.
Yeah. Well, because to be honest, when I did do that, well, okay, I won't start with that. What I will say is I've seen this film like I think 11 times at this point.
Oh, wow.
For a while, I'd say for about a year, I would say that it was my favorite film ever.
Oh, shit.
And when I contacted you, I definitely felt that way. And in preparation for this episode, I was, doing my research. I wanted to really like bring my A game. So I've been lifting weights. I've been reading a lot of Mishima's novels. Yeah. I've been watching a lot of like gay porn and taking notes. And
have you really been lifting weights?
Oh God, no! Are you kidding me? Fuck no! Yeah, I'm a weakling. No, if in my mind, intellectual weights, of course.
Yeah,
because like Mishima, I'm a decadent aesthete who cannot cope with the vulgarity of this modern world. Anyway.
He does kind of talk like that. Like he has a Japanese accent, but the spirit of the way you're talking, it's in his voice.
He stole all this shit from like Oscar Wilde, all that shit. Yeah. So I've been doing all that, and I've been reading this book. Who's this by? This book by Andrew Rankin called Mishima Aesthetic Terrorist. And I was going into it being like, I want to understand what he was all about. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great title.
I'm interested.
It's called an intellectual portrait, much like A Life in 4 Chapters, but this has more than 4 chapters. Mm-hmm. And when I got past the 4 chapters that Schrader illustrates, I was obsessed with Mishima. I read all these books, and I thought like, man... he's a dipshit right-winger, but fuck, it's kind of cool, man. He lived and died by the sword. There's something intensely romantic about that. Mm-hmm. And I won't lie, I was very much taken by the imagery of his life and, just the intensity of the way that he lived and, his willingness to really make himself into a work of art. And after doing all this and now being here on the show, I gotta say, I don't like Mishima anymore.
Wow.
and I
this
think
is
he's
free, Yui.
Shocking.
Well, not only that, I really don't think he's a good writer, and I don't like this movie anymore. And I've made this 180, and I feel very strange about it, and I want to get into that with you too. Because
I'm excited by this.
Because I'm also excited. Yeah,
I wanted to do this because I love the movie, and now I'm like, you know what? Actually, fuck Mishima. Fuck this movie. Like, I just feel so terrible about it.
Well, the guy's sort of an aesthetic terrorist when you get down to it.
Sure, yeah.
I know he's been terrorizing me.
I'm also looking forward to this because I will fully concede that I am on the way up, if not peaking on Mishima here. Where
Wow. Do you need a glass of water?
Yes, yeah.
That's all I know about drugs and stuff, yeah.
That's good.
You're hot on the guy.
Yeah, this is not, of course, any type of endorsement of his beliefs. I think we can't really do a 2-minute summary of the film. I think is going to be basically impossible, but we will do a brief summary of his life, I assume. But what it comes down to is the man worshipped. He was against, as Yui mentioned, capitalism, modernism, the corruption and decay of Japan in his eyes, mostly as a result of its involvement with U.S. and U.S. capitalism. But this manifested as a desire to return to a time that didn't really ever exist, except for in his mind, as far as I could tell, which is a time of reverence for the emperor and the ideal of Japanese culture as something that was worth dying for, worth sacrificing yourself for. And he went through all sorts of strange stages in his life. I like a person who has very marked stages that you can sort of engage with the development of somebody like this.
He really he makes the biography easy to structure.
Yeah,
at the very least. Yeah,
and just his timing when he was being alive, I think makes him a fascinating subject.
He was a man of his time.
Yes, yeah,
a man of his age.
Strange time. Yeah,
I think maybe I can do the quick summary of who is this guy Yukio Mishima, because I have done the least reading of the three of us, so I think I won't get bogged down in the details.
All right,
I'm gonna try.
Okay.
Yukio Mishima is born in Japan. Early on in his life, he is basically kidnapped by his grandmother, who was like descended from samurai. She was descended from sort of formerly noble,
the Tokugawa shogunate
people. Yes. Yeah. Who, due to the Meiji Restoration, which was itself sort of spurred on by when Matthew Perry from Friends opened up opened up Japan to trade with the West. Like, the coming of the West is the end of the samurai era, is the beginning of this, or sort of reinstatement of an emperor which sets Japan on a collision course with, like, literally with some boats in Hawaii, basically. So he's kidnapped by his grandmother, who makes him a little nuts and instills in him this respect for, and also like resentment at the destruction of a past that may never have really existed. He's like a young aesthete. He becomes obsessed with the emperor, but also like I guess kind of chickens out of joining the military, and becomes basically like the best known writer, Japanese writer internationally of his time, and also in Japan. He's like a widely successful writer and also like public figure. He's like a Norman Mailer type. That'd be like a pretty good analog, where he's the sort of guy who would be just asked for his opinion on basically anything. He is also gay, or at least bisexual, because he's married to a woman, but in his books, homosexuality is he wrote like 35 novels or something insane in his 45 years. But
his most famous ones, including Confessions of a Mask about his youth, make it very, I mean, literally all the details are taken from his life, and the character is
fairly unashamed of it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Definitely.
So he gets into bodybuilding, and sort of shaping his body as a work of art, writes these novels. Increasingly, he aligns himself with the Japanese far right, although like they're not totally thrilled to have him because of a lot of the stuff about him. And eventually basically raises like a private army that he calls the Shield Society. And he is hoping there's a lot of political unrest in Japan in the 60s, like there is all over the world, but in Japan it takes the form of it comes to a head with something called the Anpo protests, which were protests against the reinstatement, or the
extension or the modification
of the very, very unfair agreement that ended World War II. So like basically the kind of the US was going to charge Japan's credit card again to be a puppet state. And so there were massive, massive protests from the Japanese left, which culminated in the occupation of the Diet and the young protester being beaten to death by the cops. And then kind of they reinstated the treaty anyway.
Yeah.
So Mishima makes this army, and I think it seems to be seen as kind of like just a weird guy doing weird shit until he and some of his boys go because he's famous, he can get an appointment with the head of the Japanese security force. What's it called? The Japanese National Defense Force?
Japanese Defense Force, yep.
Yes. He just like literally has an appointment, shows up with his with like 4 of his army guys in the uniforms that he designed for a sit down with this general. They tie him up. Mishima insists that he makes the general muster everyone in this garrison. A bunch of bored, uninterested, like Japanese conscripts and soldiers who have not done all the reading that Mishima has assemble outside to hear him give a speech, which is mostly drowned out by them yelling at him and a helicopter. And then he goes back into the general's office and commits seppuku, which is a form of ritual suicide that is a relic of the Bushido Code, the samurai era.
Right. American coverage of this event is sort of like, look at the most Japanese guy who ever lived, and everybody in Japan's like, this is crazy. This nobody is doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this film is a biography of Mishima's life, but also, as Schrader points out in that bit that I read earlier, the whole life and the fiction work, they're all one and the same. They're all one work. Schrader sees the ritual suicide as the ending, like as an intentional, deliberate, artistic act. And so he structures this biography around both what actually happened and depictions of parts of 3 novels, the names of which are...
we have The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which is based on a real event where a young man who is maybe schizophrenic, not entirely clear, was like an acolyte at the famous Golden Temple in Japan and
in Kyoto.
Exactly, in Kyoto, and became obsessed with the fact that its beauty was maybe obscuring his ability to live in the world.
Again, he's sort of driven crazy by it in a way that, to me, reminded me of Lovecraft. I don't want to say that Mishima was Lovecraftian, but the thing that I had in my head.
Sure,
he's I don't think kind of its beauty makes him nuts. Like
it does, and it's tied up with his sexuality, as many of Mishima's texts have this sort of weird web. But he ends up trying to burn it. And kind of fails, kind of succeeds. And in real life, Mishima was fascinated by the guy who tried to do this, went and interviewed him, wrote this text, which is kind of not as autobiographical as some of his other things, but also very clearly like invested in this man who, again, subordinated his life and what we would consider normal engagement with like a capitalist 20th century lifestyle, beneath this concern with beauty or like where, how to obtain it or how to preserve it or how to destroy it and thereby honor it, whatever. So that's one. And we got Kyoko's house.
Which is really, it's like, this is like a very narrow sliver of Kyoko's house as I understand it.
Yeah, which was like his first kind of commercial or critical, not failure, but kind of a dud. But this book that maybe takes like 4 aspects of Mishima and turns them into 4 different characters. This one I have not read, but it takes one of the characters from that book, who is an actor who gets into this like S&M relationship with a Yakuza lady, and ends up dying with her ultimately.
And then the third one is the book Runaway Horses.
Yes, yeah,
which is part of his most famous, what is it, a tetralogy? Trilogy?
Yeah, it's a tetralogy. Yeah, the Sea of Fertility tetralogy. And this book was also weirdly inspired kind of by 2 different events. He says that it was inspired by this thing called, I'm going to go ahead and apologize, I meant to do this at the top of the show. Don't speak Japanese. Gonna butcher probably all these words. Yeah. Sorry to disappoint you. So this is the Shinpuren Rebellion, which was like a Meiji era rebellion by ex-samurai who were also seeing the decay of society and like the loss of honor and the westernization of Japan.
This is in 1876.
Exactly. But it's also kind of a reflection of this event that Mishima was obsessed with, which is the February 26th incident happened in 1936.
I have so many Wikipedia tabs that end in the word incident.
Yeah, this must be kind of a Japanese nomenclature thing, huh? I'm not familiar with this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just maybe it's a Wikipedia nomenclature thing because it is like, it's a very diplomatic way of describing a thing that happened without taking any stance on it.
Yeah. So this was like the attempt by members of the Japanese military, but specifically this members of this party and subset of the Japanese military who did kind of reminiscent of what he did, kind of reminiscent of what happened in the Meiji era, where they were going to get rid of a bunch of high-ranking officials from other parties who they saw as being corrupted. And they were maybe inspired by this guy named Araki Sadao. And these Kodoha people had a very abortive, it seems like, attempt. But Mishima saw it as like maybe the most beautiful event of modern history or his lifetime, or people, again, like really turning their lives towards something greater than them and like a vision of Japan that was higher than the one that exists in reality, maybe.
And then the film concludes, like sort of all of the stories conclude at once with the seppuku in real life, the seppuku at the end of the Runaway Horses segment, the death at the end of the Kyoko's house segment, and the burning of the temple at the end of the Golden Pavilion segment. Not to brag, I'm pretty sure I've seen the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, but I wonder if I would know for sure if I actually had it, you know? One of those things where you're like, I think I got mauled by a bear.
Sure, yeah, yep.
Well, you'd be seeing You've seen The Replacement, right? The one they built after?
Yeah, but it's one of those, I think it's one of those things where like when you leave the United States, there's like replacements of stuff that is still older than the US. Like,
sure,
this is Notre Dame, this is like the new buttress that they built in like 1641.
Yeah, because Mishima talks about like how in like, feudal Japan, basically they would have like rituals that were like temples would be burnt down and then rebuilt to like consecrate things.
It's kind of cool.
I hope people watch the film because I guess
check it out.
I'm behind Yui, but I thought it was terrific, incredible even. But
worth checking out.
The way that the novel parts are shot, all the things are like color coded, so you kind of have a sense of like black and whites are flashbacks to his biography, color about Mishima as the president, and then these sort of like not saturated color in film, as I'm sure we'll discuss, but like color on set design
and costumes.
Yeah, they're deliberate theater pieces.
Yes, they're framed like theater, like isolated sort of rooms and stuff.
Couple of major collaborators on this film.
Okay.
First, we've got John Bailey, cinematography by John Bailey, who is a Schrader guy for a little while here. He shot American Gigolo and Cat People, and he's going to shoot Light of Day and Forever Mine. I think those are all the Schraders he does, but so he is still in the mix. But we've got music by Philip Glass, one of the like probably the most famous
modern like classical
composer,
composer,
orchestral music composer. This is his first studio film that he does the score for. He had scored Koyaanisqatsi before this, which like that. It's just too talky for me, and has since gone on to score. It's funny to read the list of movies that he's done the scores for because it's like Notes on a Scandal.
Uh-huh.
Did I tell you that I was...
Hold on, wait, that came up last time I was on here. These fucking Notes
on a Scandal?
God damn.
Wow. Yeah.
Did I talk about how I was sitting next to a woman on a...
Yes, you said the exact same thing. Oh my God, yeah.
Okay, well...
You are also friends with Jake now. This is beautiful.
Oh no, I'm tainted.
It's talking to me is sort of like hearing a series of arpeggios repeated over and over until
but
perhaps meaning arises from
or Schrader anecdotes.
Yes, there you go.
Right. I want to do a Yui check-in on all of these elements. So
how are you doing, Yui? There's just so much to get.
I know.
To cover here, it feels like we're going to be here till probably a couple days from now. But...
I think that's correct. I will say that Philip Glass, late era Philip Glass, I think of as being heavy-handed. This, perhaps because it's mostly like 2 or 3 different strains that are just alternated. I weirdly was okay with it because it achieves that transcendental thing where you're just like developing different relationships. But I don't know, Yui, what do you feel about the score these days?
Well, I think it's fantastic. I mean, it was a bestseller for a reason. Right. I mean, people who didn't even know about this movie, like I seen the soundtrack for this movie before I ever even knew what this was. Like I would just go to used DVD shops and it would be everywhere. It's still everywhere. I just think, it just communicates that transcendental affect, but it also, I mean, it's very 80s. It's very, very 80s in a good way, in a way that people like.
80s, but one of the things that I appreciated and that I think is like it just makes Schrader distinct from Mishima is the collaboration, like such loud collaborators or such strong. Like you can tell
Schrader's not afraid to let his collaborators, like the production designer, I forget her name.
Eiko Ishioka, we'll get there in just a second. But
she's basically like a co-director on this movie. More
I would agree.
Like, insane.
And then Philip Glass is like kind of on top. Yeah, Schrader is very much willing as an artist to say, well, here's a particular element that I can see is very strong. I'm just going to let this wash over the entire production.
I mean, it's funny you say wash. I think the quote he says in Schrader on Schrader is, I told Philip Glass that I'll make the boat, you make the river, which I think is, clearly indicating this is a huge part of the film.
Very, very cool. And Glass himself, Schrader says that he approached him because prior to this, Philip Glass had done a series of biographical operas, which reading about them seemed like it's sort of like something that's called Einstein and then no one says the word Einstein. It's like that kind of shit. Yeah. But he'd done a series of these portrait pieces, and Schrader says I asked him to approach Mishima in the same way, so he delved into Mishima's work and the biographies and the drafts of the script and wrote a score without seeing any of the film, one that could be played as an independent work. I then took that work and sort of deconstructed it repeating sections, extending and condensing, and cut the whole movie to that. I then presented him with the score in a pastiche version that he had to recompose to the images. So Schrader on his DJ Screw shit a little bit.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. Chopping.
But I think... So I'd like to read throughout this episode. I have a few things to read from a piece called Mishima Mon Amour by the writer and cultural critic Gary Indiana. It was published in 1986, around the time of the release of the film. He is not crazy about the movie, but in ways that I think are generally well articulated, and perhaps Yui will appreciate this. But there's one thing he says in here, which is he says, of the score, Philip Glass's generically Oriental score.
Now that's incorrect. He's mistaken.
I immediately thought of the Simpsons episode where Bart gets a fake ID and they go see, he and his friends go see Naked Lunch, and they come out of it and say, I can think of 2 things wrong with that title.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, one of the most striking things about, maybe even the striking thing about this score is how it's not Japanese. There's no shakuhachi flute. It's all Philip Glass stuff. It's the same stuff he...
Look, the only thing I would challenge there is it might be Japanese. It's certainly not traditionally Japanese. There's nothing...
No, but it's not like he is trying to channel the sounds of the Orient or something. No. He is
it's not like a Martin Denny Exotica album or whatever.
Yeah. And it's also not like a Japanese composer. Like he hired a guy who, by the way, I found out Philip Glass literally worked as a taxi driver in New York City.
Yeah, I feel, as much as I don't want to say I love him. Sometimes I appreciate him. But if you want to listen to a movie that has what I would describe as a generically quote-unquote Oriental sound, the producer of this movie, I forget his name, he also produced another film with Ridley Scott called Black Rain. Now that shit by Hans Zimmer.
Yes.
Takakura Ken.
Now, I'll tell you what. I do love that film, but holy shit, it is literally bro, fucking, have you seen Akira? It's so much infatuated with the neon crazy, it's more, it's Ridley being like, well, Japan's just like real life Blade Runner, right? That's what it is. And Hans Zimmer's like, yeah, sure.
It's not, there are parts of Japan that are like, oh, damn, this is kind of like Blade Runner. But then there's other parts of it that are like, this is not at all like Blade Runner. There are parts of it that are like, oh, this is like some other movies I've seen that are set in Japan, like in the part that I'm in.
Please tell us more about, what was it? Akihabara?
I didn't really care for Akihabara, I gotta be honest with you. And I'm cool for that reason. Although there's one part of Akihabara which I thought was very cool.
Girls in costumes, you said.
One part that's very cool is that there is basically like there's this vast market full of little stalls, but all the stalls are selling the most specific tiny computer parts, and it's very cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
I learned about this from fucking, what is it, the anime Steins Gate, where they walk in there, you can buy like, oh, I need this specific thing, and then they just have it.
Yeah, like I need this, I need a diode, I need a single diode,
right,
and they'll have it. So there's also Eiko Ishioka, who is probably best known now for the costumes that she made for Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola film, and also for her work with Tarsem Singh, doing costumes for The Cell, and like production design for The Cell and The Fall, and Immortals, which is really fucking cool, and also Mirror Mirror, but I haven't seen that one. But it's got our friend Lily Collins from Mank. She's in that movie. Ishioka, I don't want to get like too into it, but is a fascinating... She also created the Houston Rockets logo, I learned, which makes total sense when you look at it, because it's like, oh, it looks like Dracula drew this. Look up the Houston Rockets logo right now for me. She is in many ways like an anti-Mishima in that she was a graphic designer in the 70s who was pushing against in Japanese graphic design, specifically working for cosmetic companies and fashion companies and things that were marketed toward women. She was really trying to dismantle like notions of basically the male gaze in advertising for women's products. So using Faye Dunaway actually quite a bit, and also a lot of basically women like looking directly at the viewer of this poster or this advertisement or whatever.
Cool. Not being the scene, but the seer.
Not being the scene. Yes. Very John Berger type stuff. There's literally, she has an advertisement called like, don't look at the nude, be naked, or something like that.
Cool.
And also rejecting, like, only using Japanese inspiration, only using Japanese aesthetics, like bringing stuff in from all over the world, rejecting kind of tradition, and it's collaborating a lot. Like, it's sort of an anti-Mishima. I recommend people look her shit up.
I feel like you could describe the Paul Schrader vibe as being, don't look at the nude, be naked.
Well, apparently he did get naked on the set of The Canyons to convince Lindsay Lohan to
also be. I think his probably attitude is look at the nude and be naked.
And also. I'm naked.
Yeah. That's even better. Yeah.
So can I just say, you guys covering The Canyons, that's going to be like the special episode of this entire series, The Canyons. Yeah. Holy shit.
I'm going to need to be professionally sedated in order to not to freak out.
Yeah. Well, sedated while listening to an audiobook of American Psycho.
Yeah. You know, people in LA are afraid to merge.
Yes.
Less Than Zero. I read the first 2 pages of Less Than Zero. But Ishioka, she creates these sets that Yui, as you said, they're extremely like theatrical. They're
like a little bit Jacques Demy. They're a little bit Giallo. I don't know. And yes, they're very Brecht.
Dogtown. Is that what it's called? What's the name of the Lars von Trier thing?
Dogville?
Dogma?
Dogville. Dogtown. Yeah. Dogtown is skateboards.
Yes, that's what I thought you were trying to say.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen either of those films. Okay. But it's these sets that are very visibly sets.
And like primary color shot from above in a way that like will show the 4 walls of the room and let everything else be dropped out in black, like somehow seeing a theater from a balcony or something.
Well, it's like a Minnelli musical where you'll see like the shadow of someone against the wall, even though it's supposed to go off in the distance.
Right. Yes.
It's cool.
I think the second and third segments of this are my favorite. The novel parts of those are jaw-dropping to me. I think they're so beautiful to look at.
Incredible. And then Schrader invokes Costa Gavras a lot in describing the look of the segments that are the last day of Mishima's life. Now, I do have to say, if anyone within the sound of my voice can find me the like shiny teal robe that he's wearing in the beginning of this film, I will try to pay for it, I guess. But like, if someone can track that down for me, I'd really appreciate it. I would like to wear that, and I promise, as long as it's not be.
I was gonna say the last morning of your life. What about the last morning or the first morning of the rest of your life? How about that?
Yeah, I was just planning to wear it like a lot, which I think indicates that I plan to be around for at least several days.
Yeah.
I do want to quote this. There's a woman named Nobuko Lady Albury, she was a Japanese woman who married like an English guy with a title and became like one of the premier translators of the great works of the Western canon into Japanese, including like Gone with the Wind. So we don't really trust this lady. Right. But there's a documentary from the BBC from the mid '80s called The Strange Case of Yukio Mishima, which I recommend people check out. It's on YouTube. It's also on the Criterion release of this film. But she says of Mishima, who I believe she knew, quote, "In every little thing he tried to be, he over-existed."
Yes.
Which is, damn, that's like the gif of the guy leaning back against all his friends, and then the one guy puts his hand on his face. And goes, ah!
I know which one, but I don't know if that would be an insult to Mishima. I think he was...
Maybe not.
Looking to over-exist.
Well, this is the central problem that I want to discuss. Is I think I think he would agree and he would approve.
But he would agree and say thank you. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't even know if we're doing an episode on the movie or on the guy.
Well, very difficult.
See, this is exactly it. No, this is exactly. So let's fucking do it. Okay, like enough of this bullshit production, whatever. Right. People can look that shit up on Wikipedia. This is the problem with this movie and with Mishima. He over-determined his entire life, deliberately so. And a part of me before, personally, I was like very attracted to this idea of like, oh my god, even his life, he authored, the pen, but it was a drop of blood as the period at the end of his life. Oh my god. Oh, it's so cool. And undeniably, there is a romantic power to what he did. But when I look at it now, and after reading this book on like him as an aesthetic terrorist, as the author calls him, what I think is that ultimately Mishima is a form of like an aesthetic totalitarian, is what I would call him. Is that we talk all the time about, separate the artist from the art, right? That's kind of what this show is about in a way. You can't do that with Mishima because he made it impossible to do so. And he was self-conscious to the extent that he deliberately set up his life in this way for years and years, and essentially like put himself in a position where this would be, easily accomplished. This is a guy who didn't do all this stuff on impulse. This is a plan that he must have had for at least, I would argue 5 years. Maybe someone can tell me if I'm wrong or not. But
I think like Schrader, he's a guy who seems to have these like incredibly destructive drives, but also like in some aspects of his life, just superhuman discipline and rigor. Like,
yeah, well, he obviously, ever since he was a child in World War II, he wanted to kill himself. He wanted to die in some fashion that would justify his existence,
right?
And I kind of place him outside the frame of this weakling that his family created. And when he didn't get that, right, in like Golden Pavilion, when the bombs don't destroy the Golden Temple,
right,
then he's left out to be like, well, what is my life? And he spent all the post-war years in Japan trying to be like, well, I guess I can be an artist, but really, what I want is death. And so how do I conflate art with death? How do I say, well, art is inherently evil and art is inherently about destruction? And like, how do I essentially create a totalitarian aesthetic ideology where the highest thing you can do as an artist is to obliterate yourself in your own, like, just to essentially create your own story? It's like rendering yourself into a statue or a painting. And with him, he made himself into one of his own literary characters. And I think that while this movie, I would definitely describe it as a masterpiece, I do like this movie very much, and I really think it's probably Schrader's best.
Yeah, he didn't have to go this hard, as they say.
No.
He actually probably should have.
I feel like that's a problem, though. I wonder what you guys think, because I feel that Mishima set himself up to be like, well, I'm a character now, and I have to be rendered as a character because that's who I am. That's what I want to be. I'm imposing my will, not only upon my own art, but upon my image, upon the image of Japan, the history of Japan, the idea of what a samurai is, the idea of what it means to be Japanese. He did all these things. And then Schrader comes along, and Mishima is a Schrader guy in real life.
Yeah, Mishima, Schrader literally says, like, he's the kind of guy I would like to have created if he didn't already exist. Yeah. Sort of the line about God, but with Mishima.
And so, like, there's no need to invent Travis Bickle. Here he is, and he did his own thing, right? And he fulfilled the Schrader-esque destiny. And then Schrader comes along, and he's like, well, let me make a film about this. And the film validates Mishima's own conflation of his life and his art. It directly identifies him into the art by rendering it in the vignettes, and then also rendering his suicide in another vignette. And so it just becomes, well, the suicide is now an aesthetic act that is co-equal with the novels.
There's a huge part of the suicide. There's an enormous directorial decision that Schrader makes. And I guess we're jumping to the end of the film, which feels early, but also we've been recording for 90 minutes. So, like the movie, we're sort of all time is flattening into a single ecstatic moment. Mishima, in seppuku, there is sort of a second who stands behind the person killing themselves. And in samurai culture, as I very, very, very thinly understand it, seppuku is often, this ritual suicide is often used as a way of saving face in various circumstances. It's a sort of an alternative to an embarrassment or a great shame.
Certainly one of the uses, yeah.
Yes. And so there is a second...
And Schrader chooses to sanitize what actually
there's a second the name of which I'm just looking up the Kaishakunin, who is appointed to behead the individual performing seppuku, because you stab yourself in the abdomen and sort of cut across to
disembowel.
ideally disembowel or ideally sever the abdominal artery. What's the name of it? There's like an artery where you can cut something next to your spinal column and like exsanguinate yourself basically immediately. But in order to prevent you from crying out or demonstrating weakness, someone your buddy is supposed to cut your head off. And Mishima appointed one of the people with him, Masakatsu Morita, who was, I believe, his lover also.
It's speculated, yes.
They may have had a sexual relationship, as his Kaishakunin. And this guy was not
picked another weak freak like himself,
trained with the sword. And
because like Mishima didn't know what he was doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, Mishima wasn't a fucking samurai, so it's like, what the fuck?
No one was.
Yeah.
This guy tried and failed to cut Mishima's head off. Like, he was fucking hacking away at his neck and it wasn't working. And so a third guy, Koga, had to do it. And then Morita commits seppuku himself, and Koga cuts that guy's head off.
They also changed this for the film slightly, because Mishima, in fact, in his final moments, exhorted the young people not to kill themselves, that they should not follow him.
Well, he does that in the car. He moves that to the car, doesn't he?
Yeah. I think in the film, it seemed like he was just telling the other three guys. And then in life, he told everybody, including Morita. Morita then said, I don't want Mishima-san to go alone, so I'm going to accompany him. And then Koga also had to cut his head off as well.
And so Schrader elides this entirely. We see Mishima stab himself. We don't see him stab himself, but we see his reaction to the stabbing, and there's like a vertigo zoom.
And are you arguing that
intensity?
This is for glorification of the moment?
I am asking what we think of this, because I know like Ebert said that this was, I don't know, a stroke of elegance on Schrader's part or something. We do, of course, get the ending of his life was supposed to be this great, like, moment of aesthetic and political.
Now you're getting
to my transcendental, like, pickpocket, like, but it's the moment that Schrader loves.
You're getting to my objection. Yes,
was fucking humiliating.
Yes,
where he is making this speech to a bunch of people who don't care, and he's being drowned out by a fucking helicopter.
One of his last sentences is, I don't think they even heard me.
Right. And so then it's interesting because, he means to kill himself to sort of as a demonstration of, in part as a demonstration of his, like, I guess, sincerity, but ends up humiliating himself so much that he now has a pretty good reason to save face.
But the thing is, he knew that, though. Like, he wanted to embarrass himself in this way. This is all part of this, like, masochistic bullshit.
Do you think he wanted to embarrass himself?
This is where I'm going to disagree with you. Because I don't think Mishima was dumb enough to, like, actually think, all right, now the revolution begins or whatever. This was a part of his... Because when you look at his books, like Runaway Horses, the main character in that is, like, a pathetic guy. He's not, like, this cool, like, yes, and I did it, and I'm a master. Like... all Mishima's characters, all these like tragic male figures that he has, they're all pathetic losers. And he
weak freaks.
He put himself into a position where inevitably he was going to be faced with this tragic conclusion where, I wasn't listened to, and like they were never going to listen to him. If he got what he had quote unquote wanted with that, it wouldn't be what he wanted. He wanted the excuse to be like, all right, and now it is time to die. Like he wanted to be rejected by the totality of everything that he loved, the emperor, the soldiers, all this, to put himself on this grand stage.
Demonstrate that his this is no country for old men or whatever.
Exactly. Okay. And Schrader buys into this. He loves it because he's like, well, that's what it is. That's what happened.
Well, here's what Schrader says. This is in Schrader on Schrader, and he at least says this in 1996, and maybe he felt it at the time. I don't know. The interviewer says, "Did you end up feeling sympathy for Mishima's political beliefs?" And he says, "I've got into arguments with a lot of people about this, but I genuinely believe that it was all theater." Well, that's not fair. Say 75% theater. He did have a fixation on the emperor, and he did have a very strong sexual fixation on militarism, but his interests were primarily ritualistic and artistic. When it came down to hardcore politics, he wasn't really that interested. It was all dressing up D'Annunzio style. And so, I mean, with a lot of the Schrader protagonists, and I guess this is maybe the thing that I was trying to get at talking about the fascinating aspect of this man who can critique himself, but only to a point, is they get to that explosive transcendent moment of catharsis that he never seems to achieve. And I wonder, there's like for Schrader, like a combined beauty and like tragedy in that, because he always just ends the movie there. Like, we don't know what happens after that.
Well, because he doesn't care, because the point has been made. Like, it doesn't, like, for Schrader, it's totally immaterial. And this is, I think, while I love this movie in a lot of ways, and I do respect Schrader as an artist, I really, like, now I'm like very, not only disgusted by like Mishima as a guy, and like kind of, honestly, like somewhat dismissive of him in a lot of ways, because I think that this is like, this aesthetic totalitarianism is exactly like the wrong way to go about being an artist. I don't think it's deep, and I don't think it's like, oh, melancholic and epic and tragic, and oh man, I'm the last, samurai, and I'm the last artist of Japan, and I represent everything of the falling away of an age. All that tragic horseshit that Mishima wanted to make his life into, and basically did. This is how he's remembered. This is how people write about him.
Right.
This is the movie that people watch, and they're like, damn, what a guy. Really, you're like, what is the end of this? Because if the end of this is just to make an aesthetic point, you have to kill yourself or you have to hurt people. To me, that is like an utter failure of artistry, I think. I think Mishima reached a point with his novels where he said, I'm not getting the satisfaction that I want. I need to inflict violence in, some way that makes sense to me. And he filtered it through the concept of seppuku and of the emperor and of all this like bullshit nationalistic stuff that Schrader even points out in that thing you read, right? Where he says, yeah, Mishima didn't really believe in anything. And he ultimately didn't. What he believed in was this like ultra decadent idea of art, where art is anti-life and anti, just anything that like exists in the habitation of normal existence is, it's not good enough, right? It has to be this ultimate militaristic triumph of the will over, like one individual over these fucking masses. And, Mishima talks all this stuff about the emperor. Really, Mishima was like, well, the emperor, yes, but ultimately it's about me. It's about my devotion to the emperor, right? It's like, it's like this fantasy of like the peon who's like, well, yes, I love my master, but what I really love is how good of a servant I am to the master. Like that's what I'm fetishizing. And I just think it's like the ultimate like pathetic egotistical coup that Mishima tries to pull, where he says, well, I'm going to prove that I'm the ultimate artist by killing myself. And it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what I think art is. And I think it's bankrupt. I think it's intellectually bankrupt. And I think Schrader is kind of a bullshitter for buying into this in the way that he does and presenting it in a way that validates Mishima's own self-image. Because yeah, he cuts out the embarrassing parts. He's like, he makes him into a heroic figure. And I'm kind of frustrated with it, because I used to love this movie. And I feel now that it is a part of this aesthetic totalitarian project where, to me, what I love about art, what I think is beautiful, is art that includes, pluralistic voices, art that has, dead ends and kind of like offbeat things, and art that doesn't cohere into a neat package, art that bleeds through the borders, right? That's what I want. I don't want art where, well, now everything that Mishima has ever done and ever written and ever thought is recontextualized by this whole thing that he did, that he deliberately did, by the way. This wasn't an unconscious thing. It wasn't an accident. He wanted all of it. So he imposes his will over everything that you could possibly say about him. There's no spontaneity. There's no freedom. There's no way for us to have an insight into what he is. He, from the grave, has overdetermined his entire existence. And I'm like, you know what? at the end of the day, I say fuck you. Like, I'm like, what is the point of that? Why have any of this? Like, it really upsets me.
Have you read this Gary Indiana piece, or did you just arrive at its conclusion?
No, I have no idea what this is.
All right, so I do want to just read this, and then Ian seems positively itchy to respond. So Indiana concludes, it can be argued that while Schrader's hermetic sobriety in representing Mishima fails to debunk or aerate any myths, by the way, aerating myths is just such an exciting phrase, it does offer those myths without amelioration or special pleading and lets us see them with optimum clarity in the full sensual glory that is, unfortunately, truly theirs. Mishima was hardly alone in his necrophilic absolutism and his conflation of manhood with an attraction to weapons, injury, and self-destruction. For the like-minded, Mishima is loaded with genuine substance. Mishima, the film, is loaded with genuine substance, but opposing sensibilities are free to view this film as a richly articulated fabric of appalling ideas. So, like, he sees it as... His argument, I guess, is that the film is more of a cipher than maybe you're expressing, now that I think about it. But, like, that the film is a presentation of this guy, and how you react to the film may be how you are interpreting its representation of him. But I will defer to my friend Ian.
Thank you. Of course, Yui, way too many very relevant points that you made to be able to respond to all of them, although I did want to respond to all of them. But, of course, they are gone largely. However, I want to do two things.
Look, man, like, whatever. Let's just talk about it. You know, I'm just here for the discourse.
I want to do two things. I want to read a quote that I think confirms some of what you're saying, and then I want to go into a bunch of examples that I think maybe complicate what you're saying a little bit. So one of the last major nonfiction pieces that Mishima wrote is this essay called The Defense of Culture, or On the Defense of Culture. And it is very much about what you are describing. It opens by discussing the fact that the Greeks, compared to the Japanese, view their culture as something like totally removed from themselves. They appreciate it, they idealize it, but it has no continuity with their culture as it exists today, their like cultural identity, their individual identity, whatever. And he describes the need for the Japanese and maybe people in general to engage with, I think, what you're describing in terms of identifying like a real singular core of beauty, of cultural identity, of whatever else. And then he says this about it. He says that it must be defended, and consequently the act of defending must further, like culture, have reflexivity. That is, there must be an opportunity for the identification of the ideal image of the defender and the true form of the defended. Going one step further, there must be the possibility of the ultimate realization of the identification of the defender with respect to the defended. So very similar to me to what you were describing in the sense that there is an authoritarianism in demanding like a true center that does hold, and that by defending it, whether it is the emperor or, again, this like higher ideal of beauty, I think what you were saying is that Mishima himself is elevated. Now, I think you're right. It's not like he himself believes that he is on the level of the emperor, but there is a self-satisfaction in finding like your relationship to this higher thing. However, I do also think that both his novels and to a lesser extent the film, I actually don't think the film resembles stylistically his novels at all. I mean, I'm not a person who cares about like putting a book on screen in like a faithful representation or something, but I just think like stylistically the approach to exchanges doesn't resemble his novels at all to me. But I think that's fine. However, I think in the books and to a lesser extent in the film, there's something that reminds me of Tolstoy, where characters will have these ecstatic moments, these intense, whether it's encounters with other people or reflections within themselves, where they feel like they've achieved an epiphany. And the authors are accurately representing how intense that feels to be a person who says, now I understand that I love this person. Now I understand who I am. Now I understand my relationship to the world. And then in a matter of pages, it's revealed that those feelings don't hold. And that doesn't mean that it was inauthentic, but it means that that intensity of feeling, that relationship to another person is temporary. And there is, in fact, like whether you wish there to be or not, a pluralism, because those things don't last. Those feelings, those like brief congealings of ideology, or saying like, now I understand how the world works. In the text, I think you're right. The people are mostly losers in sort of a variety of different ways. In Spring Snow, the most recent one that I was reading, is like an aristocratic, Western-influenced Japanese noble loser. And he does this a bunch of times. And for that reason, I can't help but feel that I don't know that Mishima believes, and I think reading his nonfiction to me lends the same idea. This article where he like discovered bodybuilding, basically Sun and Steel. It to me portrays a man who doesn't have the same type of confidence that he wants to express himself having. And for that reason, I think art about him and his art are much more interesting than maybe what he would tell you about himself. Because I think the stages of his life, the fact that he is gay and obsessed with Saint Sebastian as a child, this like martyr shot full of arrows, and he falls in love with a bunch of like rough and tumble dudes. Then he falls in platonic love with this woman who marries somebody else. And to me, this is not a man who projects in the telling of his life a sense that like humanity must be one way, or there is a true path. And again, I don't know if Schrader totally understood that, but I actually agree with this Gary Indian article where if we are just portraying him as a person and his texts, then if you don't see the continuity, I think it's much more satisfying. And I don't think there is a continuity there, which is why I think I love the film, because I don't see this idealization of a man. He's such a fragmented, what was it? Overexpressed? What was the phrase?
He overexisted.
Overexisting man that, I don't know, it's hard for me to take that seriously at basically any point, but I'm curious what my friends think here.
I would like to argue against the aesthetics of killing yourself, and also against the specific, I think I've expressed on the show before that I have had a kind of confused and confusing and distressing relationship to, well, many things, but the canon especially.
Yeah. Yep.
Where often I'm presented with like, here's one of the good books, and I read it and I'm like, well, I don't get this. Like this, I don't think this is good, but I must be wrong because the book is good, capital G good. It says so on the cover. And I think so much of what was so freeing to me is what was finding works of art that are not romantic in this way, that are not cataclysmic and operatic. Apocalyptic, exactly. That resemble life as I observe it.
Yeah, life like that's full of discontinuities and like
quotidian,
random
full
shit.
of discontinuity, quiet, slow, and when it's exciting, it's or when something unusual happens, it never feels the way that you expect it to. It always surprises you. You know, I think life is more like a Mike Leigh movie than like Mishima. But I wonder if, and I'm going to quote my good personal friend, Nagisa Oshima, in The Strange Case of Yukio Mishima. He's quoted as, I think he knew Mishima a little bit because he was an actor. We haven't even gotten to that. But Oshima says, he wanted to dramatize the end of his life in a beautiful way, but it was an over-elaborate gesture which failed to satisfy our Japanese aesthetic. I think he should have witnessed old age and his deterioration and ugliness for the sake of his art. So I pity him that he should have died so young. And I think what the film gets at, or at least represents, at least indicates to me, and, you know, Yui mentioned that we have a complicated relationship with auteurism, and so I don't actually even need to decide whether or not Schrader did this on purpose. The film shows a man who is he is killing himself in order to kind of force his life to conform to art that isn't to a certain type of story that basically isn't representative of the world as it actually is. I haven't read the books. I read a little bit of Confessions of a Mask, and it sounds like maybe the books are not nearly as Schraderian as the film, which makes sense.
I don't want to derail you. Just to give an example of the discontinuities, he talks about playing a game on the playground where they hit each other in the dick and run around, and they think that's like pretty funny. And also, he made him think about one of the.
I would describe the books are much more similar to like D.H. Lawrence or something. Okay. Like it's very close to that type of writing.
And Merry Christmas to that guy, by the way. That's what's another thing Nagisa Oshima said. I've derailed myself. No, I think the tragedy here, and like we see, the fact that all these books end with his life, and I think the ending of the burning of the pavilion is the most exciting. I think aesthetically that's my favorite of the three stories. Then followed by Kyoko's house, followed by Runaway Horses. And I think as they get sort of closer to the way his life actually ended, it's more and more disappointing. And when you see because initially I was sort of like, only one of these guys is committing seppuku. But then I realized there is a sort of tragedy to that where, I mean, he's ending the number of Yukio Mishima books that there are going to be. He is concluding his life. He is not going to produce any more art. So already it's arguably kind of an anti-artistic move. But it's also like, and for anyone out there who is in need of a reason to continue to be alive, I would say several of the people on the podcast right now have been in a similar situation.
Happy
may
to
even
admit
be
that. Yes.
At this very moment. Just kidding. Parody. Here's one. Nagisa Oshima would be disappointed in your aesthetics. I mean, I think, and when he said this, I was like, God damn, dude, I can't let this guy
withering.
down.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and he argues for withering. There is something beautiful in a Japanese way. And first of all, who among us does not yearn to be beautiful in a Japanese way? There's something like particularly worth experiencing about old age and deterioration and ugliness that Mishima closes off. There's a reason that the only people who have Greek statues in their profile pictures are like psychopaths, Life's messy. Sometimes your lover can't cut your head off properly.
Yeah.
Embrace it, Don't do it. Because we need your Patreon money.
Nope, that's not even one of the main reasons.
No. What we would like you to listen to further episodes is the free ones. Like, don't you want to find out how we feel about The Comfort of Strangers?
Yeah, I'm not minimizing because, like you said, Jake, I am a person who has experienced years even of intense consideration of ending my life. But, and I know that, I'm not here to minimize the pain that those people in that circumstance are maybe experiencing.
I don't mean to, but sometimes it just happens to me and I sort of realize afterward and I regret it.
But no. I am going to fundamentally agree with you in the sense that I would hope to give words of encouragement to anybody feeling that there's a bunch of stuff that it is cool to hang around for, and you can always decide later. I know that I'm not saying that you should later kill yourself, but that was a real piece of advice that a therapist gave me, which is that just keep hanging around, see what else, don't be afraid to change your life, try some other stuff, see if that helps. And
don't you want to see Furiosa?
Yeah. And then maybe, something else where the people weren't miserable.
Like this exact thing is what made me stop trying to kill myself. I said to myself, you know what? There's some movies that I want to see in a couple of years, and if I kill myself, if I throw myself in front of a train like I've been trying to do,
my friend, this has been a real easy go-to for me.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's like, you know what? Can I tell you like the most absurd shit? More honest than anything I think that's depicted about Mishima in this movie.
Please.
Is fucking like when I was in the fucking mental hospital, like I said to myself, well, you know what? What's something I can live for? Shit, there's like a new Godzilla movie coming out in like 2019. I guess I can watch that.
Which one was it?
It was King of the Monsters. And can I tell you...
that one's pretty good. I like that one.
I watched that film, anticipating it all those years later, and I fucking hated it. And I was like, this is terrible.
Great.
But then I thought to myself, I said, well, but on the way towards that,
yes,
I've ended up cultivating a better relationship to my existence. And I said,
did you like the Ken Watanabe scene? He's got a very touching scene. Okay.
No. Because they trivialize nuclear weapons and like all this kind of shit. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that here. We could do that in the Godzilla podcast.
Sure.
But
you get
that
surprised
kind of stuff,
on the way. Like, you're right.
Yeah, but what I think is like the ultimate flaw of Mishima is that all those things that you talk about, Ian, and I agree with you, all those bits of his work that don't fit neatly into the box, he views those, I think, from his own perspective, and the perspective that has overwhelmingly dominated the perspective of how other people see these works. Oh, these are kind of like prototypical me reaching towards this ultimate thing that I then am going to achieve, and which he then quote unquote achieved, and which Schrader basically structures the entire movie being like that, where he starts off in like this like crude world overwhelmed by beauty, then he puts the beauty into his own body and kind of has this narcissistic love of pain, right? And then he's like, well, all right, let me incorporate that into my own destruction. And there's this evolutionary idea via the, all the chapters. And that's Mishima's perspective. That's what he thought of it. But his actual works, if you read them, they're full of stuff that is not about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's this huge issue with this movie where it presents like this supreme, ultimate, romantic, decadent vision of the creator that he himself would approve of. Is that really what we want? I don't know if I want that anymore. I think it's kind of fucked up, and I'm not saying that like Schrader is like a jerk or whatever, that he's a monster. I think Schrader in some ways like was not critically thinking about this. I think he more or less like bought into the surface of what he saw and then just presented it, like you said, presented it as it was. But presenting it as it was, given Mishima and what he did, that's not like an uncritical, like objective perspective. It's just not. And like I think to do so, again, I feel so mixed about the movie. I'm not trying to condemn it, but I really feel this sort of disdain for this idea of a movie like this, which I think is basically perfect. Like I would describe this as a perfect film, but I'm not interested in perfection anymore. I'm not interested in this idea of like a film that crosses all its T's and dots all its I's and has, the absolute like consistency and ironclad, formalism and like all these, ways of depicting its subject matter in a way that, feels so harmonious, because that's not what art is to me. Like that's not really what Mishima did. Like it's just not his works. They're full of inconsistencies and failures and, like really kind of stupid, inane things that he himself, I think, was trying to iron out of himself as his career went on. Like when you get to his final 4 books, those books, to me, it's like you look at a man who's basically expunging himself of all his aesthetic impulses. And then, he, like it shows in the movie, he sends in like the final volume and then he goes to kill himself. And you realize this isn't like a Schrader purge. It's like the idea of, well, you need to get the lead out and here we go. And then, then everyone is left to pick up the fucking pieces of this guy who's made an apocalyptic ending of his life. And I think this would piss off Mishima the man the most. I think it's boring. I think it's stupid. I really do. I don't think it's interesting and I don't think it's deep. I don't think it's profound anyway. Like it's this idea that death is like the ultimate horizon of existence. Like fucking Martin Heidegger talks about this shit. This is like a key part, I think, of a lot of this fascist rhetoric where, okay, well, as long as you have the horizon of the nation state to define yourself in, of the ethnic people of the emperor, as long as you can define yourself in relation to this ultimate thing, then your life is justified in existence. Like you could do anything as long as you do it for the sake of whatever. And so now you have all this excuse for all these fucking atrocities. And Mishima can kill himself, but as long as it's for the emperor, you know, it's bullshit. He didn't believe in anything. He was a fucking nihilist. And like, it pisses me off because I don't think that it's an attitude that's worth valorizing and spending the time on that Schrader does, really. And but you see why I feel so complicated about it, because on one hand, I'm full of admiration. On the other hand, it's completely, I think, irresponsible and terrible.
My question, though, is like, how much is the film actually valorizing this? And I don't know, I don't have the answer to it, but like...
Well, I think it's inquisitive. It takes its perspective. Like, does it not? I mean, like, how... I don't think it's neutral. How can it be?
It's not neutral, but I think it's not a film that's, like... suggesting that other people do this, and it also doesn't, I think...
Well, no, but it presents it as beautiful and logical, which is, I think, is worrying.
See, I think I don't totally agree with that, because even the opening shots of the film are of extreme decadence and sort of like ridiculous lifestyle, right? He's arranged this garden, he lives in this room, and he wears this bathrobe. And then it's intercut with scenes of him doing like real photo shoots that he did of the very self-indulgent type.
With the butt of the statue like right next to him. Like, Yeah,
and look, I think on the one hand, there's part of what you're saying, Yui, that I agree with, which is that he did want to find what I think is a fundamental part of fascism, which is the reductionism, which allows you to conflate maleness with beauty. And obviously he was mixed up in the sense that like he was himself either gay or bisexual. That's not the part that mixed up, but the fact that he would then sort of say like, well, because I'm attracted to men are in fact attractiveness. Like there's a truer attraction about, not that I'm gay because I'm gay, but like I'm gay because men are more attractive than women are somehow. And that they're, you know, there's a part in Confessions of a Mask where he says, and of course also, anybody who feels the same way I do basically agrees that also death is just as attractive. You know, he's like not afraid to sort of indulge himself in seeking out a like simpler equation than one that is in life. But I also do think, and I think this is what I'm kind of trying to get at, is that I think the story of his life belies that so much that to me, I also do think that just talking about him is not just necessarily valorizing, because it's so in conflict with the ideas that he is in pursuit of, at least sometimes.
I have some Schrader here to read that I think might elucidate some of his thinking about this, at least in the moment of his interview. So he's describing why he and his brother Leonard, who lived in Japan, possibly while dodging the draft, and also like may have met Mishima once, but he was there in 1970 when Mishima killed himself. And the interviewer was asking him like, why do you and Leonard seem to have this affinity for Japanese culture? Because Ozu is a big part of transcendental style, and their first script was the Yakuza. And Schrader says, I think the affinity is this, and it's the same one my brother experienced when he lived in Japan. Japan is a very codified little moral universe with very strict rules which govern all forms of behavior and decorum. It's not unusual for a person to flee one prison only to find that same prison in another place. So all the confining aspects of the culture of Grand Rapids, which my brother and I rebelled against but then came to miss, we found again in Japan. But since we were strangers in a strange land, we didn't feel so hidebound by them. But then later he says the suicidal impulse is part of the artistic process. So I think we've got a guy who is conflicted, and I think there's like a respect for, or maybe an envy of Mishima's ability to like make this extraordinarily self-destructive artistic move that Schrader himself clearly cannot make. He talks about how he would like sleep with a gun under his pillow while he's writing Taxi Driver or whatever. But like, I think he's in some sense jealous of Mishima,
which is like worrying when you think about it. Like that's
true. Oh yeah,
it's very
that's concerning.
Yes, but at the same time, Mishima makes a sort of a work of art of his life by killing himself, and Schrader makes a work of art of Mishima's life by making a movie about it and taking it to the Cannes Film Festival and getting a special award, and then like going on to make more movies. I mean, he's made a decision to not fully endorse this, because to fully endorse this would mean to kill himself when he finishes making the movie Mishima, right? I mean, maybe that's
well, I'm not saying
extreme,
I'm not saying that Schrader like directly identifies with it. What I more mean is that to me, it's just that he presents it like this is like the sensible conclusion of like what he was and who he represented, and I don't really buy it. I don't believe this was like inevitable, but the film really frames it as if, well, A plus B equals C. Like,
okay,
I get what you guys are going for. Sure. Like, and again, I'm not trying to like say like, oh, this film is awful. Like, I do think it's great, but I almost don't have any time for it anymore, because after seeing it so many times, and on this last time, I just felt this like revolt in my chest, because I was like, is this really like the end point of artistry?
The Yui's chest incident.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my incident. Yeah, it felt as if I refuse to like really buy into like the Mishima ideology, and I don't really think that Schrader buys into it either, because you look at his later movies like First Reformed, that has a direct parallel with the end of this, and he refuses it. Right. He refuses it. He rejects it. So even he moves beyond it. You know, like he doesn't stay here. But I just think the position that he takes when he makes this film is this like quasi like, well, it's from a different culture, so let's just present it quote unquote as it is. But I don't think that's enough. I think you have to have a stronger take on it, because just to present Mishima as like a guy who's directly an outcome of this evolutionary process of, you know, him moving from an aesthete to like a militarist, I think that's what Mishima wanted. You know, you're extending his ideology in a way, and I think Schrader does this in an unfortunate way. And I just have to wonder, like, if he made this film today, I feel like he would include the part where Mishima's, you know, he can't get his head chopped off and like the guy has to step in and do it again. You know, he would include that part, because that to me is the artistic part. That's the part where it makes things more than just this logical extension of 1 + 1 = 2. You know, it makes it more than just this sequence, because in that way the film is too mathematical to me. It is so deterministic, and there's no room for like spontaneity or freedom. There's no idea of like there's no air in between the frames. And if you let the truth into it, which is what really happened, if you let that in instead of ending on this beautiful neat moment of transcendence, end it on like what actually happened and show like this is what happened, and this is maybe show like this is how people in Japan reacted. Yeah. Include something that's not a part of Mishima's own fucked up fatalistic ego complex. That's what I asked for, really.
Yeah. Did you see Saint Maud, Yui? Because
I did not. That was the Rose Glass movie. Right?
Yeah. I would be interested to know what you think of the film Saint Maud in the sort of the context of this conversation we're having. No, it just it has a bit of a undercutting of someone's kind of maybe delusional idea of the story they're living out.
Yeah. So like I just say I'm interested in like the cinema personally that is like, let's not be dominated by like this monolithic idea, this totalitarian aesthetic idea that Mishima really wanted to embody and failed at embodying several times, and had to force himself to basically take on, which I just think is not like, you know, it's not a way to do anything. And like Schrader doesn't think that way either, right? So he moved beyond it.
What's interesting is I think I agree with you, Yui, about film and art in general, where that I think that nobody's vision, particularly a vision that they think is an absolute vision of their life or their world or their contribution, has ever been realistic. And I think it's more truthful, more interesting artistically to explore ways where that fell short, even if the person is somebody. Yeah, even if there's a person we admire and Mishima is not a person that I admire in his life. I will say that the little moments in the film that I would identify as indicating some of this, right? Like in real life, Mishima objected to leftism, although he also had a real distaste for capitalism. And then he did go to speak, as we see in the film, when the Zen Kyoto student groups took over Tokyo University. And he did have a really positive experience, despite the fact these were explicitly leftist students. To me, from what I understand from my reading, seemed like traditionally sort of like messy university takeover, maybe not totally ideologically consistent, but driven by like real desires to see improvements in the world. And it's fundamentally opposed to what he was arguing for in many ways. And yet I think he went there and saw some type of affirmation. But because I agree with you, his desire seemed to be to want to fold it all into this inevitability narrative. He could just say, well, that's like an incomplete form of what I'm trying to do, right? It's
right.
Like art
they facilitated his idea of what he needs to do, right?
Right. But I think that Schrader is telling the story that Mishima would like to believe about his life. I don't think that's the story of his life as it actually happens. And I do wonder, although it's interesting that, you feel this way despite having so much experience with this film, I wonder if maybe for me it's softened by what I already know about Mishima and what I know about, the Anpo and Zenkakuren protests and messy assassinations of political leaders that were happening at the time, and what was going on in Mishima's personal life.
Well, I mean, I think that's always the question of a biopic, right? Like, how much of it is a work how much of it is a sort of a story or a work of art told on its own terms, and how much of its artistic value is in relationship to the truth. Like, is perhaps Schrader casting Ken Ogata or as he originally wanted to cast Takakura Ken, who's like
he did
6'2" or something. Like,
right.
Is that like when Conan would open his shirt and they would cut to a bodybuilder guy who they had dressed up in the same costume as Conan, so it looks like he has like giant muscles? Like, is he doing the fantasy version of Mishima's life that Mishima saw, and we are, as Gary Indiana suggests, maybe just invited to come to it with whatever we're going to come to it, which in the case of you, Ian, and I think me as well, like, with this context, we're seeing this as a depiction of the guy's sort of crooked
like indulging
view
in his
of the world,
fantasy,
indulging in it, and then sort of asking you, like, what do you think
does
of that?
this seem right to you? Whatever, right?
Yes,
Does this seem reasonable? But fully buying into his extreme subjectivity, rather than trying to like hedge it with like other people's opinions or something.
Yeah, cut to like some kind of objective camera.
Yeah. But I think it's totally reasonable what you're saying, Yui, where not just to like the uninitiated or something, but to somebody who is using art as a way to understand people, and the grammar of this film seems to indicate that, his life unfolded as he imagined it or something, or he like ultimately achieved what he had been writing about. And there is maybe a danger that is a type of glorification, even though it's not how I experienced it, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm not saying that like Schrader himself, because I just don't think he does like really glorify it, but I think he accepts the facts as Mishima constructed them. And I think a more interesting take on Mishima's life fundamentally must include the things that Mishima wanted left out, or that he did not overmanage into his persona, because it's essentially a persona that he created. I mean, Mishima is not his real name, it is
the whole thing.
It is a thing that he put on that eventually just consumed him totally. And I think it's like you have to find the gaps between that ironclad mask, because otherwise you are taking, I think, a pretty dangerous artist at their word. And I'm just speaking for myself, really, but I can imagine like a teenager, like, like a young cinephile, like stumbling across this movie and basically being like, well, wow, what an interesting person. This is what art's all about. Yeah. This is what art's all about, right? It's about confrontation and destruction and, like basically fulfilling your own like kind of jerk off fantasy shit, which I have to like ask, like, okay, Schrader's just, he did what he did, right? Here's, okay, we can indulge in this fantasy. Is that enough? Is fantasy enough? Is this just a part of like the Hollywood bullshit spectacle machine? I think it might be. I think it might fucking be, guys. Like, it kind of freaks me out when I think about it like that, because this is a movie that I've loved for so long. And I realize, like, it's kind of just the same bullshit as if like Steven Spielberg would have made it or whatever. It was funded by Francis Ford Coppola.
Say that to me.
It was funded by Coppola and George Lucas, right? Like you think about it, it's an extension of that whole project, and I feel because it's made by Schrader, and I love Schrader, but at the same time, I kind of fucking hate his take on this, where it's just like, well, let's make it into a fantasy. That's the first impulse, right? Why? Why do we have to? Because that's Mishima made himself into his own fantasy. Why do we have to meet Mishima on his own terms? I just reject this because I think it's like you're not, whatever. Like even to fucking agree with him, but present something other than his perspective. Like I think that's important. I think that's something that this film kind of lacks in a huge way, and I just have to wonder, if Schrader watched this today, would he really be like, oh yeah, we aced everything? Maybe he would. Maybe he's egotistical. I don't know.
I mean, he has said that this is the film of which he is the most proud, but I think
he should be proud.
Included in that is, he says there's an element of perverse joy in it, just the fact that no one had done anything like that before and no one thought I could do it. Preminger said directors always love their bastard children most, and there's an element of the fact that it's just so implausible I actually got it done. So maybe he just...
that's also a case of just thinking about himself, perhaps more than the art or in combination.
Yeah. But he's talking about that like Coppola talks about Apocalypse Now. Is this like, is this great, like, I mounted this whole thing and I did it, here we go. Is that the way we want to talk about cinema? I don't feel like it.
I don't know, but
it's productive.
I to sort of loop back to what we were talking about at the beginning a bit, like I do think it's kind of interesting that there's guys like this, and to look at them and think about them and talk about them and not be them.
Yeah, and I don't know if I even totally buy Schrader and a bunch of like white dudes who tried to understand Mishima in 1975, like 5 years after his death, writing about him. They also kind of characterized him as this total phony, or like what Schrader says, 75% performance or something. And certainly Mishima is a guy who's obsessed with performance, not just in the sense of like dissimulating, like putting on a show that's deceitful somehow, but also in the sense of like needing an audience to be able to understand your own actions or something. But I feel like that's maybe doing a disservice to him, and also being too generous to like more serious politicians who are we pretending that they aren't engaged in theater a lot of times, right? I think...
Right, well, it's like you can do theater, but there's method acting, right? You can be very serious about what you're doing.
Sure, exactly. And I think, he was a guy, he like wrote about very specific historical incidents. I mean, he had real objections about like, Article 9 of the Constitution, which is a mistake. Again, this is the part of the Japanese Constitution that kind of previously prevented them from being able to have like belligerence with foreign nations and stuff. But he would talk about like very specific laws that were being enacted. And I guess to me that means that I don't think he's a phony. I think all of those things he still like flipped through his little prism, but it doesn't mean that he is just a guy who is using this just as like a surface upon which to project Mishima. I think unfortunately it's more like his little brain was a machine that kept churning all of this into his attempts at understanding the world. And I do think that they're well articulated, if ultimately incorrect, attempts. I mean, his essays...
This is the essence of totalitarianism, right? Everything becomes a part of this whole mechanism that you've constructed.
Exactly. Although what's interesting is that his output is not consistent, like we were saying. So he keeps wanting it to be like that's what he wants to create.
Yeah, he's striving towards it.
Yeah, but in reading it, I don't find this consistency that he so desired. And I think to me that makes him more human, but again, more clearly
he
flawed.
was painfully human, and he didn't want to be. Ultimately, He wanted to be like a statue. He wanted to be this perfect, immobile corpse.
Exactly.
That people could gawk at. And, like, in terms of, like, being alienated from yourself, grappling with anxiety and depression, like, there are thoughts like that where, like, you can understand how someone could arrive at that stuff.
Right, and I was fascinated to learn that in like pre-westernized Japan, there was maybe way more comfort with also being gay. That like part of the Meiji Restoration like tricked Japanese people into becoming homophobic, which was totally news to me.
There's one of Oshima's last films is called Taboo, and it's about it's from 1999. Gohato is the Japanese title. It's about like homosexuality among low-ranking samurai.
Yeah, there's like a real established relationship. Yeah, this dude Ihara Saikaku talked about it. Yeah, and
edited by Tomoyo Oshima, who edited some of this film. There was an American editor and a Japanese editor.
But the last thing I want to address is the Spielberg accusation, which I think to me the distinction is late Spielberg, the part of Spielberg that makes me crazy. Is that I think he has a tendency to simplify lots of human activity and want to create, like you're saying, this fantasy version. For me, it's like apt for a child's understanding of the world. I mean, like Bridge of Spies, fun movie, basically like an 8th grader's understanding of world conflict or like human behavior to me, or like something you would read in like Time magazine.
Right.
And
yeah.
To me, that's very, very frustrating to see. And I could kind of understand if you feel that the indulgence of like thinking about his novels and connecting it to his life and creating this 1+1, I think is, a fair objection here. But I guess to me, all of this is still just looking at like this single person and saying like, this is what this dude wanted his life to be. And that feels very distinct than saying like, this is how humans actually are. This is how life actually functions.
Right.
This is
he doesn't universalize them in the way that Spielberg always wants to. Spielberg always wants to create like the universal subject who everyone can relate to because he's he's the big tent entertainer. Something I would like to articulate though, in comparison to something that you guys are obviously familiar with, compare this movie to Clint Eastwood's biographical movies like Richard Jewell. Like, not even in terms of, like, toss out the politics. Just compare what Eastwood shows in, say, like that, 1517 to Paris.
Sure.
1517 to Paris is full of
probably the best point of comparison. Yeah.
Unimportant incidents. It's full of, like, stuff where, retroactively, he's talking about, like, oh, well, this and that leads to how these guys are able to more or less take down, like, this terrorist. But he doesn't frame it in that way where it's overdetermined. Like, we're presented with the situation and we see these kids who are then, because of their upbringing, like, they just hang around, they play games.
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
But Eastwood also makes American Sniper, which I think is perhaps the best point of comparison to this film for me, where it's a biopic of a fascinating person that leaves out, crucially, some of the more fascinating and relatedly humiliating aspects of that person's life.
That's that Central Film's problem, is that Eastwood ultimately doesn't have a take on him. Mm-hmm. He's just like, well, he was a guy, I guess. That is a huge problem with that I think this movie kind of also has.
Much to consider. There is a film from 2012 called 11/25, The Day He Chose His Fate, something like that, which is another depiction of the Mishima incident, as they call it. That's right, real. Yeah. And I am interested to see what that film, like how they literalize it, how they depict it, because there's also there's the assassination of Inajiro Asanuma is depicted in it, which Ian's name on the call today is Asanuma Ian Jiro. Look up that guy. Fascinating figure.
Very fast.
And it just, I think, gets into the context more than this one, the political context more than this one does. But that's not really Schrader's bag. No, is it? That's what we're here for, the political context. Do we have a moment for bodybuilding corner?
Oh, yes, please. I mean, I would love to talk about this, and this is related not just to his life, but just as like the three of us speculating, as we did at the beginning of the episode, about is it possible to aim for self-improvement, the sharpening of the sword of your body in a leftist way, a liberatory way?
Ian, we've been talking to you about how you have to stop sharpening that thing. It's not supposed to be sharp.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
hammer it 1,000 times.
Now,
nose to the grindstone.
It's not just the nose. Now, I have just recently, in fact, yesterday, and again tomorrow, will go to the gym with one Aaron Casillas from Hit Factory. Aaron's in town and was really excited to go lifting with me. Now, Aaron is I felt like, I told you this, Ian, I felt like I was going to church with my friend. Like, I'm on a lark and he's a true believer. I got considerably sweatier helping him rack and unrack his weights than doing my actual reps. He walks into the fucking gym and the guy says, for a second I was worried they didn't have enough weight here. I mean, and I don't think that what Aaron is doing is, he and I have talked about it a little bit, not like a ton, but enough to know that he is not trying to pursue some kind of masculine ideal to statuize himself in order to like
achieve a superior body, a superior version of you're saying, gender or personhood.
And we've talked about, Aaron and I have talked about how both of us have felt like mental clarity after visiting the gym and just making our bodies do things. I think, Ian, you may have experienced this in a different way in doing farm work. Like, part of the body does want to do some activity and generally feels better after you use it. Not too much, obviously. Like, if you're working at a Amazon warehouse doing the same task over and over and over again, this makes the body unhappy. But moving around and achieving things is like, I think it's good for you. But there's a way that I have found, like, I belong to this gym that is very, it's very inclusive of people who are, it's like the sort of the brand of the gym, I guess, is inclusion of folks across spectrums of gender and sexuality and ability and things like this. They want very much to cultivate a non-gym bro atmosphere. And so there's a lot of folks in there who are of, like, all, just, you see people of across all kinds of gender expression, and sometimes like several at once in ways that are surprising to me. Didn't know you could do that. Good to know. But like, what I see in there is mostly people reorienting themselves in their body. I mean, I see, so much of our experience of ourselves is characterized by inadequacy or perhaps overabundance. We have these bodies and they're not the way we want them to be, and it makes us feel like we don't matter or something. And for me, obviously, I would like to look different than I do because I live in the world and I see Gentleman's Quarterly magazine or whatever. But when you turn it into a thing that you're doing rather than a means to transform yourself, like when you're trying to find out if you can bench press 100 pounds, like if you can do this, if this is something that my body is able to do. Ian, I think I mentioned that I heard Emily Gordon talk about this, the screenwriter and former podcaster. I don't think they have a podcast anymore, but she was talking about how she was having some body image stuff and getting into like weightlifting really changed, allowed her to think of not about what her body looks like, but about what her body can do. And so I think when very often we are told that we can't do things, we're not are limited in our capacity, and often like we feel like there's not a lot you can do to change the world around you. I think there's a way to do some self-improvement, do some bodybuilding, or not bodybuilding necessarily, but some weightlifting specifically, that is liberatory and revolutionary in its own small way. And also, you can get really strong to like beat up fascists, I guess, if you need to.
Yeah, I was going to unite basically those things as well. I mean, Mishima, again, in Sun and Steel, which is a very strange document that I encourage people to read, which is this investigation of him coming into his understanding of his desire to want muscles. And he does use the word
desire to want muscles.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And he talks about the abstraction of words, the solipsism, the indulgence, the elevated but ultimately arrogant spiritual strivings that come with the work of the mind. And he contrasts this to coming into your body. And then, of course, he takes it into a fascist direction. But I think we're trying to nip that in the bud and say, coming into yourself, feeling comfortable, feeling more alive in your body in the time you're on Earth. And then also, unlike him, instead of thinking of your service as being to some type of ideal, your service being to other humans and feeling more comfortable with this artifact, this machine that you occupy, and saying, now I can use it in even more exciting ways somehow to assist my fellow animals and creatures and plants on this earth. And I think that's pretty cool. And some of it is also just straight up hormonal stuff. Feels nice to move your body around, like you're saying.
You ever hit the weights?
Just like take a walk, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, no, my dad's like a huge weightlifter. I mean, he was like, as a kid, he was very in awe of guys like Stallone and Schwarzenegger. And like, today, I mean, he's just never stopped going to the gym. So he's huge. Yeah, myself, I mean, not really. I mean, like mainly what I do is I just go out for walks and take photos of everything that I could find.
That's actually really good to do and cool.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is like, I totally agree with what you guys are saying. And I think for everyone, like, you got to find out like what way works for you. So for me, I thought like, oh my God, I can never get any exercise. How am I going to get exercise? I just said, well, I like taking pictures. I like reading books. Why don't I just go somewhere else, walk somewhere, or, jog or whatever, and just go do that there and like, kind of rest and read at the same time. And it's like when you just do that, you go to like a forest preserve or wherever the hell you can go to. That's kind of, like a space where you can like put yourself into a mindset of cultivation in all senses of that term. I think that's always helpful. And I tell people this too. It's like, instead of fucking like ordering bullshit on the internet, why don't you like walk to a store if you can? Honestly, like if you don't live in the middle of nowhere, like go to a place.
Yeah.
Don't take your car. Just like do stuff that forces you to get outside of your head and pay attention to your environment. And you'll not only will you like just become healthier, you'll become more perceptive. You'll get out of your like all the ideas that you're preoccupied with. Yeah. And you'll start observing, oh, hey, this is interesting. Wow, what a pretty color. Oh, look at that animal. Like you'll just find stuff that you'll never think about before.
Yep.
Yeah. And I want to include people of various ability levels and statuses in this, because like you can't always.
Yeah, but you is saying that it's a discovery process. I think that's right. That's whatever. I think
thinking of yourself as a brain in a jar is not really. I've tried. Because
no one is.
Right.
And Mishima, I think, like poisoned himself by thinking about himself like this. Like, he went so much in one extreme, then all the way in the other extreme, and it kind of broke him. And I think, you got to develop elasticity. You got to do a bunch of stuff.
You got to moderate. You got to smoke one cigarette a year.
Right. And it doesn't have to be about exaltation, right? Which I think is also what we're saying. It doesn't have to be the case, and was very much the case for him, where you're not turning your body into a monument. You're just turning, hopefully, your body into a better body. And also, I totally agree with you, Yui, that it does just in a way that I don't know that you can replicate at your desk or in your bed. Just shift your perception of things and people around you. And I think, that's he was on to something.
Because you go to the gym, right? And you're finding new people to talk to, and like you're listening to new music.
Hold on, let's not go crazy. I'm not.
Or on a walk, like you're saying, you're walking, and the experience of encountering the guy at the store after a nice walk is so different than the experience of like thinking about the guy at the store at home,
or noticing the dog that's in the yard that you walk past, and you find out all the different places the dog likes to sleep in the yard or whatever.
And that makes you think about the world is basically like everybody's sleeping everywhere. Isn't that kind of fun to think about?
Got to get some of these folks some permanent housing, though.
Yeah, well, that's true.
That's one of the things that I notice in my walks on.
I was thinking about like bugs, but you're right. That's true.
I'm often thinking about bugs. We got to do a can check, my friends.
Okay,
and I'm not talking about
true.
beverages. I'm talking about the film festival. Yes, that famous French Riviera Festival of Cinema.
Yes.
Now, this movie was entered into the Cannes Film Festival in competition. Last time Schrader was at the festival, he's returning this year, probably like right now.
Yep.
Just some
crossover corner.
Bit of funny stuff.
Yeah.
Bit of, look at that. We've got also at the festival, Pale Rider, filmed by Clint Eastwood, also in competition. On the jury president was Milos Forman. We've also got Nestor Almendros, the Spanish cinematographer.
Well, I think the opening film was Witness by Peter Weir.
Peter Weir, who will direct Mosquito Coast.
Also in competition, we had a Mauro Bolognini film, who, of course, one of our witches friends.
Oh, wait a second. This was the Cannes Film Festival where you had isn't this like the one where it was the famous bit where like Jean-Luc Godard gave an award to Eastwood and like said, be yourself or whatever.
Right, Monsieur Honky Tonk Man. I think that was not the Cannes. I think that was a different film festival. But Godard's film Detective is in competition, and that is the film that is in part dedicated to Eastwood.
Yeah, are you guys going to do that ever? Is that a thing?
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to everything. We will also, just putting it on here right now, we will do a Patreon episode, at least in part, on the Bob Dylan music video that Paul Schrader directed in Tokyo with the Mishima crew.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Yeah. What? This is a real thing?
Yes, while he was making this movie. This is the truth
that's missing from the film, I think, for you.
Yeah, we'll cover it. We'll cover it on the Patreon, and I think we will have a special guest, as far as I understand it. Also in competition, importantly, tragically, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, the film by Hector Babenco from a screenplay by Leonard Schrader.
Lenny, yeah.
And this comes up in the Variety article that we mentioned earlier, because this is the last film that Paul and Leonard write together. And Paul describes the story of their falling out during this film, where Paul basically kind of froze Leonard out of his social circle while they were working on the film in Japan, and it was hurtful to him. Mishima gets accepted into Cannes, and so does Kiss of the Spider-Woman. This is from the article. Schrader says, "I said nobody gets 2 films that they wrote in the competition. This is your moment. You've got to go." But he won't go because he knows that I'm going to make him a member of the support band. He can't take it. And so Schrader convinces Chieko Schrader, Leonard's wife, to attend. Mishima wins like a special achievement award. They kind of come up with an award to give it best artistic contribution as sort of a...
I think I'm also going to give that award to this podcast.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what?
Congratulations. Award. Thank you.
Now, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. So then there's like... the following Christmas, Schrader invited Leonard and Chieko to come visit Mary Beth and him and Molly, then an infant. Quote, "I had envisioned this as a rapprochement where I could apologize for the way I had stolen Japan from him." First of all, Jesus. Leonard declined, but sent presents for the entire family. Schrader returned them unopened. "That was the knife," he says, tears welling in his eyes. Quote, "You can excuse all kinds of behavior as a husband and father," Schrader says, "but some things you can't. You know what the fuck you're doing." And the author says, "I was moved by the sorrow Schrader felt about his brother. Then I did some research and realized that Schrader had told a version of the Leonard betrayal story to The New Yorker last year and also to Peter Biskind back in the 1990s. It leaves me wondering if Schrader told me the story less as confession and more as a narrative device. Perhaps he's giving me the perfect ending to a piece on a Paul Schrader film that's about a man whose whole life has been a deception." They're talking there about Oh Canada, which is actually about a guy named Leonard. But bit of Mishima style. Is this man's whole life a work of art? and in this case,
so wait, what was the actual beef between him and his brother? What happened?
He kept stealing credit. I mean, they would do stuff together, and then he would insist on getting like a story by credit that his brother didn't get, or he would insist on being at a competition and his brother wouldn't be there, and things like that.
And didn't he also do this with Blue Collar?
Yes, so I mean, basically took the idea from another person. Yes.
Yeah, not a great pattern of behavior. What do you think about it?
No, I mean, he's a narcissist, and it makes sense why he would be interested in Yukio Mishima.
Correct. Yeah, and of course we've discussed this at length in terms of Clint Eastwood's also cycle of regret or slight on-screen flagellation.
I feel real bad about it, but not bad enough to do something concrete.
Exactly, but I am going to do this to my next wife as well.
Yes,
basically.
Yes.
And then he looks at the audience and winks.
Yes. Yep.
Gran Torino.
He's dead at the end of that movie.
We are going to close the show, I think. Is that okay with y'all?
Yeah.
Is it time have we said enough for one podcast's episode?
Well, we've been stuck in this JDF office for long enough. I think it's time to finally,
took action. Oh, wow.
Yes.
It's time
really
for me to
feels like it was
on.
somehow coordinated. Jake did pull out a Hachimaki style. What is that? A t-shirt?
It's a kitchen towel. And what's this? A chef's knife.
Unfortunately, we have crossed a. Worried about my friend.
I got all this stuff out, and I thought this is going to be so funny. And then over the course of the episode, I'm like, oh man, it's really, really not sort of the vibe anymore.
Got it back. Got it.
The Hachimaki is worn for many reasons. Sometimes as a sort of a visualization of one's courage or resolve, and sometimes because one is simply sweating from the head. And so ignoring the kitchen knife, it's fine that I tie the towel to my head.
Remind me to tell your famous podcast girlfriend to child-proof those Blu-rays.
Yes, smart. Yep.
Yeah, maybe she can feed part of my thumbs to the cats, and then I just won't be able to turn on the machine. It's time for one last part of the show.
Okay.
Of course, the sexual obsession check-in. And Paul Schrader said recently in introducing one of his films this about his upcoming project.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's what I'm doing now.
Sexual obsession.
I hope he doesn't listen to this episode.
No one's commentated on this. Every time you do it, it gets funnier. I swear to fucking
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Well, part of it is that we're often having someone on who maybe hasn't listened to like a whole episode, and so I say it's time for the sexual obsession check-in, and
they're like, wow, two normal dudes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, this is where we try to determine if Schrader has, like, how many of Schrader's films aren't about sexual obsession. At this point, we've determined a few of them. This one, like Hardcore before it, perhaps a trick question. Perhaps maybe it's so obvious that the answer is no. But I think ultimately this is a film that is about a man's sexual obsession, not toward a particular person, but it's a sort of a psychosexual complex that the
biodigital jazz. Yeah. I can't help but feel that he toned down so much of Mishima's actual psychosexual complex. I mean,
well, some of that has to do with like
his wife,
the fucking estate wouldn't let him do it.
But I mean, the man from his childhood would read tales of a knight who died 7 times and talk about being truly rock hard and engaging in his bad habits.
Sporting a diamond cutter.
Yeah.
Ian, we didn't even mention, what was there's that story that someone told about
there's
a night with Mishima?
That circulates about being picked up by Mishima, and Mishima like declining to engage in piss play, basically at the club, but going
First
home.
of all, we're strongly against this on the show. Declining piss play.
Yeah.
We cannot condone that.
It's like birth rates. But
there's no depths you guys won't sing to.
We won't. But he gets home with this guy, and Mishima brings out what I assume he probably called in Japanese the kit, which is like a bunch of materials to do mock seppuku. And
he had like a long red ribbon to
like pull out of his stomach, and he just makes the guy just sit there and watch. And the way the guy tells the story is like, I couldn't believe the thing that I was in awe of is not that he did this. It's that he came without touching himself.
He did a hands-free.
Yeah, just by recreating this ritual.
I didn't hear about that. That's very interesting. Like Aleister Crowley could do that. He could do that.
Wow. I mean,
he trained to do it though. Like, how did Mishima train? I don't know.
I get the sense that he had been doing this before. Probably. Yeah.
And that's the kind of like self-improvement cultivation of the body that we don't think is fascist. If you can get yourself to that, that's just kind of a fun trick.
And I do want to give credit to the listener, Sebastian, friend of ours, who sent that to me. So,
you mean Saint Sebastian?
Exactly.
I did talk to him about this. We discussed it at length.
I mean, this is about sexual obsession. Probably hard. It's hard to argue that it's not. I feel like you really have to do backflips.
Okay,
I like
it. If we want to like go into like, I fucking hate Freud, but let's go into Freud. So you got Eros and Thanatos, right? Mishima's project, he's trying to merge his obsession with death and his obsession with fucking just like, he's trying to collapse everything.
A single obsession that he is just, it's always been single in his mind, but he wants to manifest.
It's like he's sexualizing death in that way. So,
well, as I said to Ian, and I do want to read this out. He was trying to combine the Hagakure Analects with his desire to have some groovy anal sex.
Yes, Jake did text this to me. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, listener, Jake's doing something underneath the table really fast with his hand. I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, so the fucking... All this to say, is there a difference between sexual obsession and erotic obsession? Because you can be erotic about non-sexual things, right? But is that sexual?
I don't know. I don't think so.
You failed the test. You fucked up. You're done. Get out. Doomed.
You're done.
We've talked about this as one of our differences. One of our beautiful, our beautiful messy pluralistic differences is that I'm a strict sort of physical materialist, and Yui, you're kind of an elf from the beyond.
I'm insane. Yeah.
Well,
okay. Here's a difference.
I just think that it's all it's all like boners and pee-pee and poo-poo and stuff ultimately, and there's no
what
higher.
I'll compare it to, like, you know that part in fucking Saltburn where like he's fucking the grave. Like compare that to like what Mishima does, right? If you're fucking a grave, or if you're like so horny that you kill yourself, isn't there a difference there?
I mean, probably, but like I don't really have a take on it right now.
I think to me that speaks more to the spectrum of individuality, how the aspects of the world manifest in a single person, than it does to maybe like a fundamental metaphysical difference between the two ideas.
Yeah, I guess you're right. In one case, like it's projected outwards, in the other case, it's projected inwards.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's just two of the.
It's murder on the general's floor, but you better not kill the groove. DJ gonna burn this goddamn golden pavilion right down, and that is sort of the synthesis of Saltburn and Mishima right there.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Could be.
Coming to you this summer.
Yep.
You got anything to plug? Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Wow. Thank you.
I feel, I want to tell you that I feel like if I had to go into like a scary, like old building or something, I might want like a really big, strong guy with like a sword, or maybe like Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, but like to be my friend, to like guide me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you want like a Dante spirit guide type thing.
Yes, and I feel like you served that function for me with this episode, which I was very nervous about.
Type
And I
of
feel
a
like I
pyramid
had
head. Yeah.
I feel like I had an intellectual pyramid head, but friendly, alongside me.
You know, can I say,
I appreciate
don't
this.
make me fucking cry, because I'm really affected by your comment. Thank you. I appreciate that. What I will say is, what I think I ultimately did was I externalized all the negativity that Mishima embodies in my own hatred.
But you've purged it like a red ribbon rather than like your own
Ooh,
entrance.
Exactly.
Which
Red
is
Ribbon
a
Army, baby.
Better version. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, both Mishima and the United Red Army, sort of on the opposite ends of a political spectrum, both big fans of the boxing manga Ashita no Joe.
Sure.
Both like well-known fans of a manga about a boxer guy.
It was like an era-defining manga, so kind of a...
Did Mishima ever box? Because he bodybuilt. Did he ever fight?
He tried to box for a little while. He bodybuilt, he did kendo, and he did a bit of boxing.
I know he did kendo, but did he like win any bouts or anything?
I don't know that he made it that far.
Seems like you need to be sort of willing to destroy your own face more than he would have done in order to box.
You're right.
Yeah, it's true. Although he does talk about it in a way that unfortunately I found compelling. The fact that once you start to engage with your body, you experience pain as just like a further...
It's weakness leaving.
No, just like encountering the world, like further force to be in yourself in a way that can be
phenomenologically, your experience changes.
Yeah,
and this is after he went to that Moroccan market and got that little device. We just talked about this on some other episode.
Stop talking about it. Yeah, we must
about the lament configuration.
Correct. Yeah,
I think about it all the time. Anyway, Yui, I was asking if you had anything to plug.
Yeah. Fucking, I write stuff on Letterboxd. Follow me there.
You're very good at it. It's
so
wonderful.
Good.
Check out Yui's Letterboxd. Always enriching. Always.
Yeah, maybe I put some work into it. I don't know.
Like mustard on the sandwich of any film, or ketchup, or whatever you like.
Yeah.
But
sometimes you order stuff without mustard, but I'll tell you what. If you want mustard, I got
get
plenty
it
of
anyway,
it. I got
plenty of it.
I put stuff on my YouTube channel, just commentaries. I'm writing like a couple of screenplays right now for some people.
Mishima
what
2.
else?
It's the body decaying in the...
Yeah.
It's like that Ryan Reynolds movie where he's in the coffin, but it's just a body in there, like a dead body the whole time. Kind of a cool idea now that I think about it. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it would be cool if it wasn't for Ryan fucking Reynolds, who's terrible.
Yeah.
But what if it was... never mind. I'm not going to say that on the microphone.
Yeah, last thing is, what I just want to say to people, don't read fucking Mishima. Maybe read him. Maybe. Don't take him too seriously. What I say is, instead of Mishima, read Kathy Aker. Read her. Because she is a very similar author who kind of, basically like, was kind of like the more baby boomer American version of Mishima in plenty of ways. She was a bodybuilder. She was very much interested in this kind of like non-intellectual idea of aesthetics and trying to, transcend yourself and express yourself within the process of writing. Much more experimental, influenced by William Burroughs. Led a very interesting life and didn't kill herself. And taught other people, was friendly. Cool person, Kathy Aker. Fucking read her book. She's awesome.
That's great. That's a wonderful plug. I do want to say, sort of on a similar note, if you are interested in a work of art, sort of engaging with the question of the Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit, and the kind of death of same, or the eroding of same by westernization, always a good time to throw on Spirited Away.
Sure,
you're going to feel a lot better at the end of it than you do at this. At least watch them both. Get yourself a little, a balanced meal. And also just the Oshima thing again, it's a braver aesthetic move to die of old age.
It's true. And you may have, in fact, done that listening to this episode of Paul's Cast D4.
Well on your way. I'd like to plug now listening to another podcast, because this is just about over. Ian's cat is
mad at me for being seated too long.
No, it's not a cat. It's a Neko.
Yes.
Perfectly put. Remember to subscribe, rate us, rate a review. It helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad. Write it don't write it in your blood. Just get like a red marker and kind of pretend like have a good time. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcastiforme. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a 2-person Paul Schrader podcast, you can email us at podcastiforme@gmail.com. All of this and more, well, not really more. All of this is at podcastiforme.com and shootingyourselfinthehead.com, which we do not endorse at this time. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. Next week, we will be talking about the Mosquito Coast,
sure will
Peter Weir film, scripted by Paul Schrader from a book by Paul Theroux. Very excited about that one. It's going to be crazy. And until then, bye.
Bye.
Use magic to kill death.